35. Okay, let's get started. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Dr. Magnus Ergested. He is the Dean of Engineering and a professor in Electrical Engineering and Computer Science at UC Irvine, California. Prior to joining UCI, he was the department head of Georgia Tech, Department of the School of Electrical and Computer Engineering. He was also the director of Georgia Tech's Institute for Robotics and Intelligent Machines. He received the master's degree in engineering physics and the PhD in applied mathematics from the Royal Institute of Technology, Stockholm, Sweden, the bachelor from Stockholm University, and he then spent some time at Harvard University as a postdoctoral fellow. He conducts research in the areas of control theory and robotics, with particular focus in control and coordination of multi-robot systems. Needless to say that he is a fellow of IEEE and IFAC, a member of the Royal Swedish Academy of Engineering, and he is now the president of the IEEE Control Systems Society. He has received many, many awards. I cannot go and list all of them, so I will say the Ragazzini Award and the Hugo Schuck Best Paper Award. So please, all of you, please let's invite Magnus. Magnus, thanks for coming.
Tony. I appreciate it. Well, thank you, Tony, for that kind introduction. I also want to say thank you to the organizers, because I am both honored and excited to be up here on this very large stage. I like to walk when I give talks, and I'm going to be getting a lot of exercise here today, so I'm looking forward to that. No, but I'm also really excited that I get to talk to you today about collaboration in multi-robot systems. And in fact, the point of this talk is to really draw a distinction between collaboration and the more traditional notions of coordination, right? So if you look at traditional multi-robot systems, let's say that me and Tony were supposed to be a certain distance apart, and I'm too close, then I back off. If I'm too far away, then I go a little closer. So what I did is I moved around, and every now and then I checked in on where Tony was. That's a coordinated strategy. I'm largely doing my thing, paying a little bit of attention to what's going on around me. But collaboration really means truly being able to do something new by partnering. It means being able to get access to new capabilities by teaming up, something you fundamentally couldn't do by yourself. Right? I could move around by myself, regardless of whether or not Tony was sitting there. But what can we do together that I can't do individually? That is collaboration. And there's been quite a bit of work done on that, but what I'm going to try to do is really formalize this notion in a rather precise way so that we have a theory of collaboration. And to do that, I'm actually going to borrow from nature. I always love going to nature when I need inspiration, because nature is filled with really interesting situations where organisms of different species, different kind of animals, team up to solve problems that they couldn't solve by themselves. And if this teaming arrangement is mutually beneficial, so both animals benefit from it, then it's called a mutualism. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to formalize this idea of a mutualism for teams of robots. All right. So to get started, we probably have to look at more... AV people, do I need to do anything to progress my slides? Clinton! There we go. So let's look at some of the more traditional multi-robot problems out there. The most canonical of all problems is really the formation control problem. You have a team of robots, they're supposed to assemble some shape, right? And the standard way of doing that is you look at a number of pairwise distances, you make sure that the right distances are maintained, and voila, you're able to assemble the shape. Another canonical problem is the coverage control problem, where you have an area of interest and you want to spread out the robots in such a way that this area is covered. Turns out that these two problems can be solved in exactly the same way. What you do is you write down a cost as a function of where all the robots are, and this cost is a sum over all the agents themselves. So you sum from 1 to n, where there are n robots, and then individual costs that are a function of the robot states and the robot's neighbors' states. However we define states, right? But the point is that they have the same structure. If you define this cost, or energy, or Lyapunov function, if you flow against the gradient, so you move in a negative gradient direction, then you solve these problems. And the gradient is a little bit magic because it preserves structure. So only information from your neighbors will be needed when you're flowing against the gradient. And it turns out that formation control is solved in this way. Coverage control is solved in exactly this way. In fact, you can look at a ton of different types of applications, and they're all solved in the same manner. I'm having trouble with my clicker. So, if you look at rendezvous, right, how do we get to the same point? If you look at flocking or containment control, where you want to keep something in an area, boundary protection, cyclic pursuit, all of these have exactly the same structure of a cost over individual costs involving states and neighboring states. And in fact, I'm going to go so far as to say that this is how you get coordinated control. And 14 years ago, I wrote a book with Miran Mesbahi on multi-agent systems. In hindsight, it turns out that this entire book can be summarized by costs like this and negative gradient flows. What is not captured in this, though, is how do we do something fundamentally new? How do we go from coordination to collaboration? And that is really going to be the focus of this talk. And to get there, I want to start with spending a little bit more time on coverage control. How do we actually spread out to cover an area? In part because that will inform how we think about collaboration. And the other reason why I really like coverage control is that it resonates really well with this theme of sustainable development and environmental monitoring using robots, because the application we're going to look at is an environmental monitoring application. I'm then going to move on and discuss mutualisms. So examples from nature where animals team up to solve problems. Then we're going to have to dive in a little bit into what's called constraint-based control as a way of formalizing mutualisms. And at the end, we're going to get to collaborative teams. So here, for instance, turtles are letting rabbits ride on top of them to get over rivers, right? That's a collaborative arrangement. So that's the path we're going to take. So let's start with the coverage control problem. There we go. I got excited about coverage control. Again, I've gotten excited about coverage control quite a few times in my career, but I am now in Southern California. We have wildfires in Southern California. At UCI, we have a very, very good wildfire ecologist who models the evolution of wildfires. And together we decided, you know, let's use drones to monitor what's happening to these wildfires. And what we want to do is we want to know where the fires are, how they're moving. We also want to predict where they're going, and even better, we want to be able to take measures to prevent fires. So for instance, drop water on fires or foam. So that was really the setup. And if you want to know where the fires are, you want to spread out robots, right? You want to have them out, making sure that you know what's going on. You want to see where the fuel is, so the dry leaves and so forth, which is a coverage problem. So I went back to traditional coverage control to try to understand how to spread out these drones. And when you do that, there are 5 ingredients you always have to follow when you do coverage control. There's this beautiful paper that's now 20 years old, Francesco Bolo, Jorge Cortes, and Sonia Martinez, where they really made sense of a lot of work that had been done previously in coverage control and showed that this is the general structure. So step 1 is you have a domain. In this case, it's a forest. That's what you care about. And then there is a density associated with that domain. And in this case, it could be where the likelihood of fires erupting would be. So a high density means lots of interesting stuff. Low density means we don't care. So that's step 1. Step 2 is you deploy these robots, and each robot is in charge of its own domain of, or region of dominance. So basically, there is an area where I, as a robot, I'm in charge. So if there's a fire there, that's my fire. If it's a fire over there, that's someone else's fire. So you get the region of dominance. This picture is lion prides, the territory associated with these lion groups in Tanzania, because these are territorial animals. It's basically a territory for each robot. Each robot is in charge of some region. So defining the region is the second step. And then the third step is quality of coverage. If I'm here, I'm in charge of points in my region, how well do I cover this point over there? I need a measure of that. That's step 3. And then we write down a cost. And this cost now has exactly the form that I talked about, which is it's a sum over all the agents. You take the area integral over your own region of dominance. And then you have this C term. So C is the cost that basically says how poorly am I at point Pi covering a point Q. And then I'm going to weigh the point Q by the density and say if this is an important point, I have to pay more for being bad at covering it. If it's an unimportant point, it doesn't matter. And then you compute this integral, right? And then step 5 is you flow against this gradient, and you end up with something known as Lloyd's algorithm for doing coverage control. It's quite elegant. It's a direct application of this idea of coordinated control. So I thought, you know what, let's apply this to wildfires. The problem I ended up with immediately was wildfires don't behave the way we wanted for this to work. So the first problem is the density doesn't stay put. Wow. The density doesn't stay put. It is, in fact, time varying, right? Fires move around. So the density depends on time. Not only does it depend on time, it also depends on the agents themselves, because they're there dropping water on the fire, right? So the act of agents being present is changing the evolution of the density. So that's the first problem. The other problem I had was if I'm deploying drones, let's say this drone is carrying a lot of water, it's going to be not very effective, slow. It gets there, drops the water, it's now dealt with a fire. Now it's fast and nimble, but it can't fight fires anymore. So the capabilities of the drones also changes over time. And we needed to try to figure out how do we mess with coverage control to be able to do that. And we ended up embracing this idea of coordinated hunting as a mechanism to understand it. This is a picture of, these are actually sardines. They're spawning off the coast of South Africa. And there are these sharks, copper sharks, that are feeding on the sardines that they're eating. But then there are also birds, gannets, apparently they're called, that are diving in and eating these fish. So you have a heterogeneous collection of agents consuming the fish. And instead of fish, of course, we're going to think of it as fire. And instead of sharks and birds, we're going to think of it as robots. So this is our new problem, right? How do we use different kinds of robots to eat up the sardines or the fires? Well, the first thing we got to do is figure out who is in charge of what area. And the traditional way of defining the regions of dominance is to use Voronoi tessellation. So you use Voronoi cells to describe. I'm having a hard time with my clicker. Do you know what's going on over there? There we have it. Okay, so the traditional way of describing regions of dominance is I'm in charge of all the points closest to me. Then you get what's called a traditional Voronoi tessellation or a Voronoi diagram. That is how sensor coverage algorithms typically work. The problem is, if my drones are fast when they don't have water and they're slow when they have water, all of a sudden the time it takes to get to a point to put out a fire matters. So instead you have to look at things like how quickly can you get to a point. So we define the cells as being all the points that I can get to faster than anyone else, and then you get what's called a multiplicatively weighted diagram. And standard Voronoi diagrams, they have straight lines in between cells. These multiplicatively weighted diagrams can have semi-bizarre looking curves. If you are looking at the time it takes to get to a point, you get circle segments. So all of a sudden you have these weirdly shaped regions where fast robots are in charge of more area, and slow robots, they get to be in charge of smaller areas because they're slow. Right. All right, so with that, we can now ask about costs, right? Quality. So for us, it's time to capture. So if I'm located at point Pi, I'm robot I, and I want to go to a point Q, the quality of how well I'm covering that point Q should be how long does it take for me to get there, right? So that's time to capture, which is distance divided by speed, then you get time. So the cost then becomes a sum over an integral. Now this integral is not the standard Voronoi cells, it's one of these weird multiplicatively weighted Voronoi cells. Everything in red here is non-standard. So then we have the time to capture, which is, you know, how long does it take for me to get to that point. Then I weigh things not just by a density that's a function of the point itself, but also a function of where am I, the agent, and evolution over time, because fires, they drift. And if you now do this and you flow against the gradient, you get the following thing that I'm calling a theorem, but I'm telling you no details, so it's not really a theorem, right? That basically says, if I'm flowing against the gradient to this thing that you can compute, then I asymptotically achieve a critical point, meaning I find the local minimum, subject to some minor regularity assumptions. My friend, thank you. Okay, here's the big test, right? Are you guys with me? Oh! Actually, he should have the applause. So we looked at the fire evolution, right? So this is now a reaction diffusion model of how fire evolves. In this case, there is wind and there's fuel, and the color tells you how hot the fire is. And then we ran this algorithm that's eating up the fire, and the lower picture now shows how the fire is being extinguished by these robots that are basically dropping water. It's simulated, of course, but this allows us to now do rather complicated things. But if you look at it, each robot is doing its own thing. I think it's quite impressive, but it is coordinated. It is not collaborative in any particularly interesting way. So the question then becomes, how can we take this and really understand collaboration in a better way? And I want to start with going back to this formula, right? So this was this idea about coordinated control. If you look at this problem, I'm going to call it the coordinated task assignment problem. I have two robots, and I have two targets. They are the x's. If each one is minimizing a cost of this sort, then what's going to happen is the triangle robot is going to go to the point closest to it, and then it's going to get stuck because there's a step there. The square robot is going to go in the other direction, and voila, it finds its target perfectly. That is a coordinated approach. This is flowing against the gradient of a cost involving individual costs. But anyone that looks at this realizes that, you know what? The square robot can actually drive up on the triangle robot, right? What about this, right? This is collaborative. All of a sudden, the square robot, by driving up on the triangle, got access to a third dimension, the z dimension, right? It could go in altitude. So by teaming up, the square can actually go up in space. It gets on top of this ledge. It gets perfectly to the x, while the triangle gets to its target. And all of a sudden, we're doing something by teaming up that individually they couldn't do. This, to me, would be collaboration as opposed to pure coordination. And by the way, it's clear that this is good for the square. The square can actually climb up now. It's not entirely clear why it's good for the triangle, but if it's good for both of them, then what you have is a mutualism. So what we need to do now is try to understand what exactly does this mean mathematically. Right? But first, let's look at nature a little bit, because mutualisms will play an important role. So I gotta say, whenever I get stuck, I read a book on biology, or I pester someone that has read a book on biology, because nature is amazing. There are so many fascinating examples of things out there. So mutualisms, like we said, are these beneficial arrangements between members of different species. So what you have up there is a badger and a coyote. So badgers, it turns out, they're really effective diggers. So they can dig down into burrows and scare up these ground squirrels that are living underground. So they're really good diggers, but badgers are not very good hunters. So once the squirrel gets up, it disappears. Coyotes, on the other hand, are really fast and good at catching squirrels, but not very good at digging. So by teaming up, and this is not an unusual pairing, you have badgers digging, squirrels coming up, the coyote catching the squirrel, and then they share. Nuts. This is a very famous example. These are ants and aphids. So the ants are keeping these little bugs, basically like cattle, but instead of cows, they're keeping bugs. And what's going on is the ants will paint the aphids with pheromones that basically say, hey, this is my bug. So it's providing protection from other ants and also other predators. So the ants are providing protection, and the aphids, they produce sugars. So they produce food for the ants. It's a really remarkable setup. You've probably all seen this, little birds that are sitting on top of mammals. This is an oxpecker on top of an impala. The oxpecker gets parasites, typically ticks, and the gazelle gets its fur cleaned. Good arrangement. The most classic of these arrangements is really trees and fungi, right? So you have these fungi growing on trees. Trees, through photosynthesis, can produce sugars, so energy. These fungi are really good at producing certain nutrients, phosphorus and nitrogen, minerals. So by forming this relationship, everyone gets something that they couldn't otherwise get access to. And this first relationship, this is called a nutrient-nutrient relationship, where what's being exchanged are really nutrients. These two are service nutrients relationships. So the aphid, they get the service of protection, but the ants get the nutrient of sugar, or the impala gets the nutrient or the service of getting its back cleaned, while the bird gets nutrients, meaning food. And the coyote badger, right? The coyote provides the service of catching stuff, and the badger provides the service of digging. So this seems like something we could understand robotically, right? So the service is, you're letting someone be able to do something, and nutrients, maybe it's information, or maybe it's energy. But it really tells some story that we should be able to embrace in robotics. So the question then, of course, is how do we take these pictures from nature and apply it to heterogeneous teams of robots? The way I'm going to approach it is in the following way. So let's say that this is me. Apparently I'm a car, I'm a Porsche. And I'm driving, right? The world looks a certain way to me. It has a road, and I'm supposed to stay on the road. This is what the world looks to me when I'm alone in the world. There is basically a set in some abstract sense or in a very real sense of a road, which is the part of the world where I am fine by myself. But then, let's say there are more robots out there, right? All of a sudden, the world looks a little different. This is what the world looks like. I understand that Dubai has a traffic problem, but Abu Dhabi is fine, so this is probably Dubai. The point, though, is all of a sudden, my world got smaller, right? Because I'm here, and now there's a car over there, so I can't go there. So the presence of other agents somehow shrunk my world. But it's also possible that, you know what? My world got bigger, because I can drive up on things. I can be a square robot driving up on triangles. So there is some idea here that maybe the world can get smaller or the world can get bigger. And this idea of the size of the world, and I'm speaking about world, but this is really, you can take this in information spaces or state spaces, but abstractly, by adding other agents to my life, my world is either shrinking because they're annoying and in the way, or they're getting bigger because we can collaborate and do things we otherwise couldn't do. I should also point out that a lot of times there is something the robots should actually do, so you have to define smaller and bigger relative to a mission, and I'll explain what this looks like in a little bit. But this is what we're going to do. But to do that, we need to understand what does it mean to have a smaller or a bigger world, right? So for that, we need to understand constraints. And the way to do that is to go back to our first robotics course that we ever took. And the first thing we learn when we're doing autonomous robots is avoiding collisions, right? So the most canonical of all robotics problems is don't hit stuff. Right? That's what we all learn in our first autonomous robots class. Here's an example of two robots. They're actually moving towards each other, so they're on a collision course. But I painted the arrows green because it's possible for these robots to do something and avoid a collision, right? So it's not inevitable. They can avoid collisions. In fact, there is a part of the joint state space here where wherever you're there, you can actually do something to avoid collisions. So there is a part of the world where it's possible not to hit stuff. But then there's also a part of the world where it's not possible not to hit stuff. It could be when I've run into a wall, then I've obviously hit something. Or if I'm running very quickly towards, I'm a car, and I'm driving very quickly towards the wall, there comes a point where no matter what I do, I'm going to hit that wall, right? So there is another part of the world where it is not possible not to hit stuff. So in many ways, this idea of the size of my world is going to be the stuff that is good for me, where I can operate efficiently. And collaboration is hopefully going to make that set bigger. That's the idea. And it turns out that a lot of different kinds of problems can be set up in this way, where, you know, don't go unstable, don't run out of battery, don't get disconnected from your neighbors, don't get lost relative to a map, don't lose coverage if you're doing coverage control. They all have a similar setup in that there is some part of the world where good stuff happens and some parts of the world where bad stuff happens. And the name of the game, when you're moving around as a robot, is if you start in this good set, which from now on is going to be called the safe set, because that's the terminology, then no matter what you do, you should remain in that set for all time. So let's do an example, right? Let's do collision avoidance. So I have two robots. Let's assume they're control affine. So xi is the state of robot I. Xi dot is, F is the drift term, G is the actuation dynamics, U is my control term. There is a set of the joint state space where you're inside that set. Life is good, you can do whatever you want. Collisions can always be avoided. When you're on the boundary of that set, you better do something because otherwise you're going to collide. And when you're outside of that set, there's nothing you can do to avoid a collision. That's just it, right? We're going to assume that this lime green set is what's called a super level set to a scalar function h. So h positive means you're in the interior of the set, h0 means you're on the boundary, and h negative means that there's nothing you can do to avoid collisions. Fine. So now, here's something you could do, right? Let's say that you have a robot that's out driving around, doing its thing. It's executing a control signal that I'm going to call U nominal. This could be something that you're trying to learn. This could be an operator. It could be a nominal controller. And at each moment in time, I'm going to not use U nominal. I'm going to use U that's as close as possible to U nominal squared, subject to, let's make sure H is never negative. Why not? Right? I'm going to tell you why not. This is complete nonsense. It looks nice, but it's not, it makes no sense. Here's the problem, right? I have a cost in some function or some variable that I call U, and then I have a constraint in another variable that we're calling X, and there is no connection between them. Let's say that I want to minimize Y squared such that Z is greater than 5. That's just stupid, right? So this looks nice, but we can't do it. The problem is there's no coupling between X and U here, or U and X. The way to get that coupling is, of course, through the dynamics. So I'm going to share a beautiful, beautiful result with you. Some of you have seen it. This involves control barrier functions, but it is so clean. So let's say that I want to be inside this set. So H should be non-negative. Okay, let's assume that if we somehow, by magic, could drive H down to 0 asymptotically. Let's say H dot is negative H, then we have an exponential decay down to 0. Then this is what H would look like. It turns out that we can characterize a whole class of functions that will drive H asymptotically down to 0 from above. Extended class K functions, doesn't matter. I'm just going to call it minus alpha. And all you need to know is that it drives H down to 0. Well, that would be something. But now, what if H dot was greater than or equal to this alpha? Then we have something called a comparison lemma that says that the green line, or the green curve, is always greater than or equal to the red curve, which, by the way, is always greater than or equal to 0, because it's getting to 0 from above, right? So that means the green curve is always greater than or equal to 0. That's the constraint. So the theorem says that the safe set is forward invariant, which is fancy speak for saying if you start there, we stay there. if the control input satisfies h dot of x of u greater than or equal to minus alpha of h of x for some extended class k function. That's just a constraint that ensures that no matter what u you pick, this needs to be satisfied. And this now has the right structure. And in fact, it's better than that. We're minimizing u minus u nominal squared, right? That was what we minimized. It turns out that this constraint is linear in u. All the complicated stuff is in x. This is actually a quadratic programming problem. We can solve it blazingly fast. It's not complicated. We can even solve it in a distributed manner. So here's an example. Soon here's an example. So the point, though, of course, is that if the input satisfies this constraint, then if the robots start safe, they stay safe for all time. So here's an example in the air. Those of you who fly know that it's kind of miserable because stuff always falls down. And when they do, they break. What we did is we had these quads fly in a circle. And then a former student of mine, Li Wang, is piloting with a joystick the fifth quad, trying to make it slam into these robots. And it's impossible because of the constraint. So the nominal controller is trying to drive the fifth quadcopter into the other robots. Li, by the way, now works for Tesla designing their autopilots, so that makes me a little happy. The point, though, is this allows us to humanly pilot this thing and ensuring safety through a constraint. I've used this idea a lot in other applications. So one application is environmental monitoring. I love the fact that the explicit theme for this entire IROS is sustainable development using robotics, involving environmental monitoring, because I think that's one of the most important tasks that we as roboticists can help with. You know, we have an urgent problem that we're trying to solve, which is what's going on with our climate, and if we can help with that, by all means we should. I panic changed my slides during the forum earlier today because I was so inspired by this forum on marine robotics. There was a talk about the challenges of monitoring things by the polar ice caps, for instance. I thought that was really beautiful. The point, though, is if you send out a bunch of robots into the environment to monitor what's going on, you can have them do different things. I decided to be a little extreme and to say, you know what? I just want these robots to sit there and not do anything and monitor what's going on. They're just going to not spend any energy if they can avoid it. So I want to minimize the energy spent, basically do nothing, subject to stay alive for as long as you can. So longevity. And in fact, this is very similar to how ecologists think about animal behavior, which is minimize energy expenditures, subject to survive. And survive is defined in terms of what's called environmental pressures or ecological constraints. So the point, though, is let's figure out what this means. So we turn this into a barrier function. Don't die for environmental monitoring. And don't die means don't collide, which we now know how to do. And always have enough energy in your battery so that you can make it back to a charging station. We're going to use solar-powered robots later, so they can't be in a cave somewhere and run out of battery. They always have to have enough energy so that they can go out and recharge. And we're using coverage control. Each robot, they're now an environmental monitoring robot, should cover a sufficiently big area or charge the batteries. And you know, you have to deal with the Boolean composition here, but you can turn this into a barrier function, a little H function, and somehow just let the constraints drive it. So we put this on, first just on robots on a little tabletop lab. So these are 4 robots. We're going to speed up time because they're told to do nothing, right? So we're going to have to wait. So do nothing, minimize energy while covering area. So they spread out to cover this area. And then after a while, the robot in the 4th quadrant is going to run out of battery, and it's going to go to this charging strip that's over on the left. And what I love about this is that the control objective is min u squared. That's it. And then all the action is in the constraints. And the constraints dictate now behavior in a rather, I think, fascinating manner. We looked at things like, do we actually maintain enough battery all the time? And it turns out that yes. So we did this in the lab. Then we decided, let's put this on robots out in nature. And I started working with conservation biologists that were interested in what's going on under the tree canopies. So up amongst the trees. So what we did is we made these little cable-driven robots. So we attached cables between the trees, and then we had the robots hang under the tree canopies, doing nothing, right? Min U squared, environmental monitoring, measuring things with a microclimate, and then every now and then they would go out and sunbathe, recharge the batteries, and then go back in under the tree. And we started developing this and realized that these are super slow robots that don't do anything. Let's model them on sloths. So we built the Slothbot. It's an adorable robot, by the way. I think it's the cutest robot I've ever made. So we deployed this in the treetops at the botanical garden for 1.5 years. It just basically hung there. We had 2 for a while. Measuring things, it doesn't matter too much what the things we're measuring are. It's things like carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, luminosity, so microclimate type stuff. But it was interesting because these were hyper energy efficient robots from a mobility point of view. Min U squared, don't do anything, subject to don't die, right? And then I moved to California, and I learned about the beaches. It turns out there are beautiful beaches in Southern California, but the beaches are shrinking. And what's happening is you have sand being pushed up on the beaches by waves, and then you have sand coming from the surrounding land areas through erosion. But we're building roads and houses and blocking sand from getting to the beach. And by the way, big storms are ripping sand away from the beaches. So little waves push it up, and then big storms rip it away. And we have more and more frequent storms, and they're bigger and bigger. So sand is being eroded, and we thought that's a perfect thing for the Slothbot to look at. Let's figure out if we can track what's happening to the beaches in Southern California. So we teamed up with a state park, Crystal Cove State Park, and they were excited about this idea of putting slow environmental monitoring robots there to look at what happens to the beach. But they didn't like the sloth. They said, there are no sloths in Southern California. You need to come up with a different animal. So I was walking with the president of the Crystal Cove, and we were talking, and as we were doing that, we see a raccoon digging through a trash can. So we decide, let's make raccoon bots. So what we're doing now is we're building, it's basically sloth bots with a different shell, and I have a video that is very hot off the presses. We submitted the raccoon bot to ICRA, so this is not published. You're pretty much the first audience. I showed this video 2 days ago at the university here in Abu Dhabi. This is the second time this video is ever shown. So here is the raccoon bot on a wire. In this case, it's moving up and down in order to figure out what is the solar intensity profile so that it later can go in under the tree and every now and then go out and sunbathe. I like the raccoon bot. It's not quite as cute as the sloth, but that's okay. Fine, so that's another example where we're using these constraints. A third example that I'm really, really fond of is the Robotarium. So I decided almost 10 years ago to build a remotely accessible swarm robotics lab when I was at Georgia Tech, where people would upload code. The problem is people would break stuff in the Robotarium. Right? So we built these safety mechanisms that we now know how to do. So here's an example where we send out 22 robots on the perimeter of a circle, and then we say swap positions by going through exactly the same point in the middle. And as you can see, this constraint kicks in, preventing robots from colliding. And this is one of the tightest collision avoidance algorithms out there, as far as I'm concerned. The robots get very close together, and they're able to navigate what's going on quite elegantly, I think. Fine. The cool thing about this safety mechanism is we've been able to keep the Robotarium in more or less continuous operation since we went live in 2017. We now have over 4,500 registered users. We've run almost 8,000 experiments. When it's ICRA or IROS deadlines, you always see the number of submissions spiking because people are panic running experiments on the Robotarium. What I set out to do with the Robotarium was really democratizing access to robotics. I really want science to be about who has the best ideas, not who has the most money. And a lot of times, that's what happens when you have hardware. So that was the idea. Here's what the outcome was. We looked, this is a few years old, but we looked at where are the users from. And it turns out North America are well represented, overrepresented. Asia is number 2. Europe is number 3. But you know what? There are labs in South America using the Robotarium. There are multiple labs in Africa that are routinely using the Robotarium, and that makes me happy, because what that means is that we have actually succeeded at reaching parts of the planet that otherwise wouldn't have access to a swarm robotics lab. So from my point of view, even though the green sliver is small, it's strictly bigger than not there at all, which is a good thing. The one thing you're noticing, though, is Antarctica is missing. So to you who are grad students here, if you go out and become professors at the University of Antarctica, please run experiments on the Robotarium so I can say that I have 7 continents represented. So that's my one challenge to you. The other cool thing that happened was there were new Robotariums being built, right? So the lower example, this is the Duckytown Robotarium that was put together at ETH in Zurich. The top experiment that was really, really cool. It was run out of Tokyo Tech in Tokyo, where they were coordinating robots in their lab with robots at Georgia Tech. So you had swarms that were 11,000 kilometers away, 400 millisecond delay in communications round trip. And the question is, could you coordinate these things across such a big, long stretch of land? So the point, though, is these safety mechanisms allowed us to run this for a really, really long period of time. Now you're all wondering, what does this have to do with collaborative robots? Well, I'm going to tell you. Remember this picture? This is the car, right? Well, the state is X sub I. The road now, that's H sub I. Right? This describes where I can be as a robot. The safe set is the road itself. It's the super level set to HI. So this is what the world looks like to me. I can move around and do whatever I want as long as I stay in SI. And now, let's add more robots, right? So what happens then? Well, Naira, will you be my second robot here? So Naira entered the picture here. That's okay, I'm just going to point at you. She's there, which means I can't sit in that chair, right? Because someone is already sitting there. All of a sudden, my life became a little smaller, perhaps. So there is an impact that Naira has on me. That is H-I-J, H Magnus Naira. And then I compose what the world looks like to me with what the world now became thanks to Naira. And by the way, this is not an easy thing to discover, right? What effect do other robots have on me? You know, can people lift me up? Can you throw me through windows? Can we do, dances that we otherwise couldn't? Really discovering this is something that we're struggling with and working on, I should say. And one of the things we're doing is trying to really learn how new capabilities emerge. So I don't want to say that this is easy, even though the math looks easy. But now, I can really ask, what does my world look like with Naira in it? So Naira, this is what my life looks like with you in it. Right? It's a set of all xi such that hij is greater than or equal to 0. But I do want to point out this existential quantifier. What that means is that I'm going to assume collaboration. It means Naira is actually, if I want to sit there, she's going to let me, right? So it's going to assume collaboration so that we can do things together, right? So assuming that we're playing nicely with each other, this is what the world looks like to me. So now I have some way of actually describing what's going on, right? So here is, turtles can go on land and water, rabbits can be on land, let's assume they can't swim, birds can fly. But by teaming up, they could do all sorts of things, right? This is cool. All of a sudden, they can fly with turtles. And you think this is a cartoon, by the way. I found a movie that proves that this is doable. Here's TikTok. See? Clearly it happens all the time. The point, though, is now I can ask and compare what my world looks like with Naira in it and what her world looks like with me in it. So if my world... This is very poetic right now. If my life became better with you in it, and your life became better with me in it, then we have a potential for a mutualism. Thank you, thank you. The reason I'm saying potential for a mutualism is that there is an assumption that we are helping each other. It could be that Naira just goes, no, I'm not leaving my chair. What are you talking about? Right? That could happen. But if we decide to help each other out, this describes what we now can do that we couldn't do before. And we can actually characterize when collaboration is beneficial, which is really when you have an expansion of these sets. So we implemented some rudimentary architecture for testing this, right? So, you know, I'm doing my own thing. I'm carrying out my individual task. I get stuck. I signal for help. We're going to assume that everyone is helpful. So we're setting up the collaboration. The world is still defined through this individual constraint. And then when we collaborate, we take the composition of my constraint and the constraint, the pairwise constraint. And we try this for a number of different scenarios, including, by the way, squares and rectangles. You're going to see a simulation that is not using a physics engine, because the physics doesn't look right at all. But I have, you know, 2 triangles and a square. And you're going to realize why this is not a physics engine in a sec. But basically, all of this, yeah, so not physically viable, but all of this is triggered automatically by them running up against situations where they need help, and they're signaling from help. Then the new barrier functions kick in. And I kind of like it because it's automatic. We don't tell them to do this. This is all driven by these constraints, right? So we're right now building robots that can actually do this rather than crude simulations. We also tested the rabbits and turtles. We did it on the ground, and we actually, in this video, we don't even carry each other. What we are is, if you're close enough to me, then I count it as you being carried by me. So you have a rabbit that cannot be in the water, and you have a turtle that can be everywhere. So the rabbit gets stuck here, it can't get into the river. It signals for help. The turtle says, don't worry, I'll help you. And it goes and it picks up the rabbit. It's just, you know, close proximity in this case. And then it moves the rabbit across the river, and when that's done, the turtle goes, fine, I'm going to go to my goal point, and it moves on. And again, we didn't tell them to do this. What we did is we changed the constraints through these barrier functions, and that allowed us to describe when these collaborative arrangements were better, right? So that's kind of cool, right? What I got very interested in is, since we stole this idea from ecology, an idea of a mutualism and these expanded sets, can this actually help ecologists? So we started working with an ecologist at University of Wisconsin, John Pauli, and he was really interested in looking at what they call landscape heterogeneity, where you have very uniform landscapes with little variation. You typically tend to see empirically more collaboration than if the landscape varies a lot. So we tried a bunch of different landscapes, and we ran these experiments with rabbits and turtles. In this case, we said that rabbits can swim, they're just not very good at swimming. It's energetically costly, and turtles certainly can walk on land, but they're more efficient in the water. And then, because we're ecologically inspired, we ask questions about how effective this is that an ecologist would ask. So in ecology, they talk about fecundity, which is a measure of how successful a strategy. So fecundity is really code for the rate at which you're having babies. Offspring, that matters in nature, right? Our robots don't have babies, but what they do is solve tasks. So fecundity to us becomes the task-solving frequency. What's the frequency at which you're solving tasks, which are these waypoints that we're generating across the landscape? And then in nature, longevity matters, right? How long do you live? In this case, longevity means how long can you keep going as a robot. It turns out that, for instance, we said rabbits, they spend way more energy when they're swimming than compared to when they're on the land. So there's energy expenditure. And then ultimately, an evolutionary ecologist will ask about fitness. So fitness is fecundity times longevity. It's total number of babies, right? Or what is the amount of offspring you have to spread your genes? That is a measure of biological fitness. Since we talk about fecundity in terms of tasks, the fitness is simply the total number of tasks you solved throughout one battery charge. Right? So that was our notion of fitness. I should also point out that I've gotten really fascinated by looking at ecological principles in robotics. So my pandemic project was, I wrote a book on robot ecology, where we used a lot of these ecological ideas to try to understand robot behaviors. And I do believe that as we're getting to a point where we're putting robots out for long periods of time, it's very natural to talk about these robots as organisms in habitats. And all of a sudden, they're living in their environments. And you really need to think about how they should do that. I saw a fascinating talk earlier today. Don't know if I can find the person who gave that talk, about this underwater robot that was 160 plus days operating underwater, helping with pipe inspection for oil rigs by going down and recharging at this charging station underwater. And 160 days in the ocean is pretty darn impressive, right? So I do think this idea of thinking now of the charging station as food, maybe for this robot, is a very natural way of getting to this idea of fitness in robotics. But anyway, right? So here's my robotic rabbit. It's moving through a landscape along a path, say. Now we're going to look at how much energy do you have to spend to move around, right? So the total energy is the energy for moving. You spend more energy if you're a rabbit going in water than on land. And it turns out that there's also an energetic cost associated with setting up a mutualism. So every time you change, and this is happening in nature too, you have to pay a cost. So collaboration, you have a collaboration cost. The mobility is simply the path integral that this robot is taking, and the terrain resistance dictates how much energy you're burning, and then you multiply this by the mass. And my mass is just myself if I'm moving by myself. It's my mass plus my partner's mass if I'm carrying my partner, and it's 0 if I'm being carried. Right? So that's the setup here. And then we ran a bunch of experiments. And weirdly enough, John, the ecologist, he insisted that on the x-axis, the higher you go on the x-axis, the less varied the environment is. So when you go away on the x-axis, you get little variation. And it turns out that the lower graphs here, that's the total fitness, so total number of tasks. And there comes a point where the rabbit can solve more tasks if it's following the red curve, meaning it's collaborating. Similarly, there comes a point where the turtle can solve more tasks through collaboration. So what happened is a mutualism emerges when they both benefit from it as a function of the homogeneity of the landscape. And what's interesting about this is this was kind of an observation that ecologists have made. So we decided, let's write it up and send it to an ecology venue to see if we can actually take robotics that was inspired by ecology and now give back to ecology. So with that, I would actually like to summarize what I think that this talk was about. It's really the why, how, and when of collaboration. Right? And the why is, why should you collaborate in the first place? Well, you can do things that you otherwise couldn't do. And I think this idea of expansion of safe sets is a very tight way of describing what you now can do that you previously couldn't. I think even if you disagree with some of the stuff I say, you need to agree with that, because that's, I think, quite tight. So that is the why. We should collaborate because I can do things now. I have access to a bigger set of possible actions or information states, if it's a sensing story you're telling, that allows me to do things I otherwise couldn't do. So that's the why. The how, well, we have this architecture. You can do this in a number of different ways. I've seen these repeated games that show how these things could emerge, right? So this is another how. You can pick this in different ways. When, though, I think is interesting. I have really liked this idea of thinking about fitness of engineered systems more broadly. And the when is when you can solve more tasks in total by collaborating. I think this is a little speculative, but this idea of engineered fitness, which is really task fecundity times longevity, is a very, very important idea, especially when you're deploying robots for long periods of time, because you could have the robots not doing anything, but being out there for really long periods of time. That's longevity, but the fecundity isn't very great. Or they can move around like crazy and solve lots of tasks, but then run out of battery very quickly. That's also not the right way to think about it. So I like this combination quite a bit. So with that, I do want to say thank you. I thank my sponsors. Thanks to this conference for letting me speak. I've really, really enjoyed. This is my first time to the United Arab Emirates and to Abu Dhabi. It's been great. I've had the fortune to work with some really great collaborators, Aaron Ames, John Pauli, and Faryar Jabari on this. The real heroes, though, are the top row here. These are the lab members that contributed to this work. So if there was anything you enjoyed in this talk, it was probably due to them. And If you didn't like it, I suggest that we blame the organizers of the conference for inviting me to come and give a talk. Thank you.
On time, and I know I should have read your bio when I forgot the robotarium. Yeah. Okay, so we have time for a few questions. So please raise your hand so that I can see you. I cannot, it's difficult to distinguish.
There's one right there.
Yes, please.
Join us on stage.
There was another. Okay, but anyway, please go ahead.
I think you should come up. Come up. Yeah. Otherwise, people can't hear you. Hi.
Thanks. Yeah. Thank you very much. First of all, thanks for very inspiring and instructive lecture and with analogies to biology. So, I have a question regarding the theorem that you brought, right? So, most of the systems that you considered are kind of neutrally stable, and the system has no exogenous inputs. But as we know from flocking of birds and fishes, they do use streams of air and water and all those things. So, can we extend this approach to such settings? Yeah.
So the short answer is yes. The longer answer is kind of, right? When you truly have to look at the effects of, fluid dynamic effects, right? Then life becomes a little more complicated. What we're doing, for instance, you can look at just, let's say, airflows as providing a vector field pointing in some direction. That's fine. But if you genuinely have to solve Navier-Stokes equation to describe what's going on, then the answer is no. This is also, I wrote down a control affine form for my collision avoidance. If Euler-Lagrange is enough, then you can do that. The second you have, soft wings or things that are all of a sudden, continuum dynamics looking things, then this kind of collapses. So yes and no is the answer to your question. Well.
Any other question?
You got to come up.
Well, Eliseo, you need to raise your hand faster.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I have a question regarding scalability with these methods, especially if you talk about control barrier functions and you try to scale, also because we're inspired by the environment. So how does that affect?
It's impossible to hear up on stage. Say that again.
So my main question is about scalability, given the methods you were just mentioned.
Yep.
Especially that we're inspired by the environment and biology, and this is what we see that they can do efficiently, actually.
So it really depends on the complexity of that's a good question, right? So if you're looking at pure collision avoidance and using these barrier functions, for instance, for encoding that, then it scales beautifully. There's no problem. You can actually distribute the computation in an effective way. But collision avoidance isn't that complicated. It's you're there, I'm there, let's not get too close. Or I'm moving towards you, you're moving in some direction. When you're doing things like when I said, do nothing subject to stay alive, and stay alive was cover an area and do something else, or all of a sudden you get much more complicated constraints, and there we're seeing that there are computational issues. We can't distribute it all of a sudden. So it really, there isn't a clear-cut answer to your question. Sometimes it scales really well, and sometimes it doesn't, which is life, right? Yeah.
We have time for 2 questions, one and then Eliseo.
Oh, hi. Thanks, Magnus, for the interesting talk.
Yep.
My question is that, right, have you looked at a kind of complete opposite settings? For example, right, we have robots which do not want to collaborate. They're actually competing against each other, but they're still subject to the constraint, right? Like, don't die.
Yeah.
So in that scenario, have you been looking at the scenario? Can this also apply to that scenario?
Yeah, so this is a really good question, too. I assume that the robots collaborate. And the architecture that we ran was when I need help getting over the river, I call for help and the turtle immediately shows up and carries me across the river. what happens when they don't collaborate? And in nature, to be honest, right, animals don't collaborate naturally. There's an absolutely crazy mutualism, which is these Nile crocodiles will get out of the river, the Nile, open up their mouth, and then there are these little birds, Egyptian plovers, that fly into the mouth of the crocodile and pecks away the meat that's stuck in the teeth, right? So the bird gets food and the crocodile gets a tooth cleaning. How did that emerge? I mean, the first bird that tried it is just boom, right? So I do like this, and that's not necessarily adversarial. That's just, nature is pretty rough sometimes. So this is where I think these ideas of repeated games are more natural ways of describing how collaboration can emerge, even if it's adversarial or maybe not at least collaborative. If it's truly adversarial, you're going to have to use different set of tools. However, I still think the first part, when you're characterizing the potential effect of other people or other agents on me, that still holds. It's just a question of what architecture do you use for actually doing the collaboration or not, right? But nature is not collaborative. It just happens to be strategically advantageous sometimes to collaborate.
Okay, last question, you have the floor.
Hello, Magnus. So I learned a lot today about pairwise mutualism. I was wondering whether with the same framework you can model subpopulation type of mutualism. The example that come into my mind are like, for example, ants or lemmings that you need a critical mass to build a bridge, or leafcutter ants that you need a certain subproportion of the system to give the capability to each other and to increase efficiency.
Yeah, so that's another really, really good question. And again, if you look at nature, or you look at ecologists describing nature, they typically don't talk about things at an individual level anyway, right? They talk about populations, and this is better for a subgroup. There is another step that's further away from that, which is really altruism in some sense. If you have a group where some robots may be willing to sacrifice themselves for the better of the team, right? And that's something that I think is really fascinating, and we haven't really touched on in a systematic way. I think this idea of some robots must die on purpose, right? That's interesting. And if you have clever things to tell me about it, I would love to hear, because I think doing this, but at the population level or a subpopulation level, is a very, very fascinating idea. So thank you for that.
Okay, Magnus, thanks for your interesting talk. We are running out of time. If you have any questions.
Thank you.
Okay, and let's thank the speaker.
Thank you.
It's still coming. No, we're just trying to contact them. I think they're going to prayer. Should have come back by now. 1:15.
No problem. I'm more than happy to continue testing. Hi, my name is Tim Chung. Pleased to be here. Excited to share and hear what other panelists have to say.
Afternoon to you, ladies and gentlemen. And I know it's Friday afternoon, and I thank you very much for coming to this session. I'm sure you won't be disappointed because it's going to be a really interesting session. It's on robotic competitions, and we know that there is now an explosion of competitions around the world in robotics and AI, much of it driven here in Abu Dhabi. And we have 4 very distinguished speakers today. I'm very, very honored to be introducing them and to be moderating this session. Our first speaker is Professor Pedro Lima from IST University of Lisbon. And as many of you know, Pedro is one of the pioneers in robotic competitions. He is president of the Institute of Systems and Robotics as well at IST Lisbon. And he's a trustee and VP of the RoboCup Federation. And he also coordinated the EU Framework 7 project called ROCKIN, which was one of the first R&D projects in competitions. And I'm sure we will hear more about it. And also, I organized the Mohammed bin Zayed International Robotics Challenge twice in 2017 and 2020. And Pedro, of course, was an invaluable member of that team, and he provided so much valuable advice to all of us. So I would like to warmly welcome Professor Pedro Lima to give the first keynote speech of this session. Welcome, Pedro.
Yeah, now you can. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. It's really an honor to be here. As like Mal said, I have been passionate about robot competitions, and I look at them as research events, and that's going to be maybe my major claim. The title, I mean, because the session is split on covering robot competitions all over the world, I'm going to focus on European competitions, which usually look at them really as robot research competitions. But maybe my main goal is to convince those of you who are not yet converted about the value of robot competitions in general and for research in particular. So why robot competitions? Why do we insist on that? They really have a lot of impact on many different things. In the beginning, many of the colleagues would be kind of skeptical about them. Then there was a trend of thinking they were great for educational activities at the high school level first, then even at the university, undergrad programs, and so on. But slowly, people started understanding that if we look at the competitions the right way, they can be a big push in terms of research, particularly if you look at the systems as a whole from an holistic perspective. rather than just as to the subsystems. And this can be a complementary way, even in conferences, of looking at the value of the contributions of teams. So you look at a common problem and you see who's able to solve it better, the same way that we present papers which can provide better solutions for the different things. Well, just to launch a few topics for discussion, and there will be more, the instruments to do this are several. And some of these events are competitions that occur only once, others are challenges that raise the bar over time by providing more complex challenges to the teams. There are competitions that provide money prizes. There are others which use that money to fund the teams in a way that they develop a project to then come to the competition. Well, the impact are several. I'm talking about research, but you can see from the pictures two great examples of success of after competitions. I mean, the autonomous car got a big jump after the success of the Stanford team in one of the DARPA challenges back in 2005. And the team of Sebastian Thrun just went to Google to develop the Google car. Then you can see Kiva Systems with Amazon, run by a company that was started by Raf D'Andrea, that was a RoboCupper, and keeps saying that his experience with RoboCup was fundamental to develop this. So technology transfer, innovation, no doubt, education, no doubt. Let's talk about how to ensure, measure scientific value. So in 2012, and after some years also of skepticism about this, the European Commission decided to go ahead and organize a call for organizing robot competitions projects. And two projects were funded. ROCIN, which I coordinated, and Eurathlon, coordinated by a good friend and colleague, Alan Winfield from Bristol. ROCIN focused on indoor applications, domestic robots and industrial robots, while Eurathlon was about sea, land, and aerial robots, so outdoor robotics. In ROCIN, we developed the concept through a lot of different discussions, which actually was also then used by Eurathlon, of doing benchmarking. So we were really pushed from the beginning by the call of the project that these competitions should be able to benchmark different solutions in a systematic way, not just go there, compete, and see who wins. And we defined, this was, may seem kind of straightforward, but it really costed us a lot of discussions, functionalities and tasks as the things we should benchmark somehow. The functionality is what we know as a skill or an ability that the robot has, navigate, grasp, understand speech, and so on. While the task is more like a description of something you want the robot to do, which will require composing several of these functionalities that the robot can do. So then you can see that a task has several functionalities, and the functionalities can be shared among the tasks, but we actually benchmarked them separately. We even did some work trying to see the impact of the functionality performance on the task performance. But in the end, we decided that the best way of doing this would really be to kind of decouple the two performance evaluations. So we assessed the functionalities in a more, say, traditional way. You can see up there a picture of one of the tournaments where there's an object on the top of a table. It's always located in very precise location with the marking that the motion capture system can grab and determine the location of the object. And all the robots go to the same place to determine to detect the object, so to recognize it and to determine the location. And then they are ranked according to the quality of detection and of precision of localization. So this is done systematically and several times so that we can see how good the robots are doing object localization. We do it for many other things, for speech recognition, for manipulation, and so on. For the tasks, and you can see one there of one of the events of ROCIN. You can see the home that we use for the domestic robots, and the robot is moving around, listening to commands from a lady there. Everything is autonomous, needless to say, and the robot hears these commands and goes and do all sorts of tasks like picking up objects or even switching switching on lights which are remotely controlled. And in the tasks, all we did was to score the number number of achievements. So if the robot, say, comes out of the room, gets to the door, and then gets to the table, and then gets to pick up the object, these are like different achievements. And there are also penalties, like if the robot bumps into an object. This simple thing was on purpose so that we could kind of avoid all these details of how much should each of the functionalities contribute to the task, for instance. I should say that we published a paper on the Robotics and Automation magazine about this back in 2015. I should say that the work was performed by the consortium, but a good chunk of it started from previous research by the team at Politecnico di Milano, Francesco Amigoni, Matteo Matteucci, which is around here, one of the partners in the project. Many of us in the consortium were RoboCuppers, and so we were really and assumedly inspired by the best practices we brought from RoboCup. But there are differences which I think is important to point out, and maybe this will also lead to some discussion, at least with Uvo when he presents the RoboCup part. In RoboCup, particularly in at home, so you see here the industrial and the domestic robot thing and doing some benchmarking here, it's clear because you can see that we are acquiring the location of the robot from the mocap, the domain, the limits of the map, and then we compare with what the robot estimates about its location and the laser scans. And we did data sets of that so that then people could use their own algorithms and determine what if they had better solutions. But I was saying that the benchmarking in RoboCup does not really exist in this sense. So it's more like you encourage teams to handle unexpected situations. So in a sense, like being able to be more generally intelligent robots. While here, because we were doing benchmarking, we would favor repeatability. So they had to do this several times, and then the scores would come from, say, a median on an average, not from just the single or best performance that the robot had had. And also a small detail, we had small tournaments instead of big events, like in RoboCup, on purpose so that we could have a few teams coming to a place near them, less expensive, could be even in a lab. And this fostered the idea of having several test beds scattered around Europe. There are now 7 or 8, which they all had the same standard design so that the team could go to another place and still be benchmarked the same way as the team going to a different one. In 2016, these projects were over, and the two projects were merged into what we call now the European Robotics League. For a while, they were still sustained by a few projects. There was one Shirock that, can you switch off the sound, please? I don't need any sound. Thank you. So we started with the 3 leagues that were the merge of the previous project, so indoors, consumer, professional, and outdoors, the emergency robots. But then we created something which we called smart cities, and this is an example of one of them. So we went in 2019 to Milton Keynes, UK, to a big shopping mall. There were a lot of people attending. And also, even more important, we had people, I mean, lay citizens coming and participating. So when you see the robot trying to pick orders from people in a coffee, these are people who are not roboticists. So they would sometimes interact with the robot in a way that was not the way roboticists might expect. And this continues. There were other editions, one in 2021, one in 2023. And now this is really part of the European of the European Association of Robotics, EU Robotics. They are coordinating it because they found this was impactful, and it's a big part of their activities, like the forum and the week that are held annually. Okay, so from this, I think, I hope I have convinced you that competitions can be about benchmarking solutions for a common technical problem. And this typically will require that we develop concepts and software which are modular so that we can transfer them flawlessly and easily between different robots, between different applications, tasks, I mean, and in a way that this is flexible and robust to changes. So developing software models that can be shared among different teams would be nice. And in 2 years ago, a new European project started called EU Robin. It's actually a research project, but it's also a network of excellence of robotics and AI partners all over Europe. And the goal is to achieve cognition-enabled, transferable, embodied AI. The objectives include what I had just said. We should be able to find out ways of having modules that can, and data that can be transferred between robot platforms and applications, tasks, in a way which is flexible and which behaves robustly to the differences that will occur. And initially, so this is the idea of the project. The project is not about competitions. It's coordinated by DLR, and Alina Abu Shafar, which might be also around, the coordinator of the project, came up with the idea that we should have competitions to be able to foster this idea of sharing modules. And so we came up with the concept of cooperative competitions, where what we do now is to include in the performance evaluation of the teams the idea that they get points not only for the success of their functionalities and tasks, but for the fact that they use modules from other teams, and also if they develop methods that the other teams use, they also get points if the other teams use them successfully. This way, we encourage teams to collaborate. And we expect to find from that collaboration what does distinguish the best practices of doing this. So the first competition will take place in 1 month after Humanoids 24 in Nancy. And right now, we are in what we call the marketplace phase. So we develop a marketplace where the teams put the modules. These modules are going to be in EuroCore, which is a repository that is being developed in the project. There will be more contributions. So it should be like a kiosk where people can go and pick up modules in the future to use in their robot applications, hopefully easy to use and transferable. EuroCore is also supported on the European AI on-demand platform. And during the on-site competition, the teams will use the modules from each other. They will use their own modules, of course, and they will be scored and ranked for that in actually also 3 leagues, which correspond to work packages of the project, and which are, again, industrial, domestic, and outdoor robots, land and aerial. So basically, it's the same idea. They are going to, there's some subtlenesses, but they are going to be evaluated by how many milestones they reach. And then in the end, they will be scored for that. As a sneak preview, I would like to leave you with a video. It's somehow big, and I don't know how much time I have, so I may have to interrupt in the middle if Lakmal makes me a sign. And it's actually a very nice video of an hackathon we did in Seville back in 2023, which was not a competition, was not even a co-competition. It was an hackathon, but the teams really collaborated a lot, and a set of heterogeneous teams from the different labs, or many of the labs which are partners in the project, under a common topic. The idea was to do a door-to-door parcel delivery with heterogeneous robot teams from supply point to user's home. And this is going to be published very soon, a paper about this on the Robotics and Automation magazine. So how long do I have? Okay, fine, thanks. So there were 8 robots, and you can see very heterogeneous, from manipulators to wheeled robots, mobile manipulators, and so on. And this first one starts with the Sorbonne manipulator. So this is accelerated 16 times. And you see the manipulator packing a box. And now there's the Centaur from ITI Italy that is going to grasp and carry the parcel to the flight area, where there's an aerial robot to pick it up and bring it to another robot. Many of the robots here were autonomous. Some of them, like in the case of the aerial robot you're going to see, which also has manipulators, was teleoperated with a haptic interface. But one important thing is that, especially between the autonomous robots, this was all developed in less than 1 week. And people gathered together and discussed the different solutions they had. They even tried to use things from one another. And they would exchange synchronization signals for the robots to know when they were ready. So, I mean, what you are watching was actually performed. It's edited and it is accelerated, but it was performed in a single chunk. So it was not like picking parts and then putting them together. Now you have the Swiss Smile, which is getting ready to receive this. So what we expect of events like this, and especially from the competitions, again, is that we can learn how the teams follow paths to develop modules which are really much used, so that we learn what are the best practices and then introduce these ideas for future usage. And this is quite important because of the goals of the project. Okay, so this is the rolling Justin from DLR that is going to pick up the package. Just give me a little bit more, because I think the video is funny. I cannot accelerate it from here, otherwise I would. So he's going to put it on the top of actually my team, my institution, Tiago Robot, and Tiago is going to go and autonomously navigate to the door, ring a bell that it detects with the vision, and this makes another robot come and open the door for it to enter and take the package inside the apartment. So we are in the final part. The parcel is going to enter the apartment where it's going to be unpacked. Yeah, okay, so it actually detects the thing and rings the bell. Why am I showing this? Well, first of all, to illustrate this idea of cooperation, and also to illustrate this idea that it is important to be able to do these things in an integrated fashion. There are many problems that arise, and it's not just a matter of engineering or making them robust, which a company probably should do. It's a matter of really understanding what is the best way of using these things together. I mean, you may not want to have a great localization sub-millimetric if that uses your GPU time a lot, and then you cannot, you know, see where the button of the ring is to determine where the next step should be. Okay, so the KIT robot is going to pick up the parcel and then unpack it. I guess I'll better stop, though this part is actually exciting, but I'm really over my time and I don't want to waste the time of my fellow speakers. So thanks a lot. I hope I convinced you about robot competitions. We'll have more time to discuss. Thank you.
I would now like to welcome our second speaker, who will, I believe, join us from via Zoom from the United States. He's Dr. Timothy Chung. He's the general manager at Microsoft. It's good to have somebody from industry speaking at this channel. Dr. Chung leads the autonomy and robotics group at Microsoft. And also, equally importantly, he was working for DARPA before that, and many of you would know Dr. Timothy as the program manager for the DARPA Subterranean Challenge, which I'm sure many of you took part in. So I'm really honored to welcome Dr. Timothy Chung to give his keynote speech at IROS 2024. Thank you. I would like to welcome him. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, everyone, and pleased to join you this afternoon. As highlighted, I have this opportunity to highlight the role that DARPA has had in creating a number of these types of challenges to really draw inspiration and drive inspiration for a lot of tech innovations across the board that many of you are familiar with. And Pedro mentioned, the earlier previous speaker also mentioned a number of those types of opportunities, such as the self-driving car, the original Grand Challenge, as well as even RoboCup. And I'm pleased to say I'm a product of RoboCup myself as well. And I think this continued tradition continues going forward. So I wanted to start by highlighting how the DARPA competition prize award was created. This is over 25 years ago, essentially, is when DARPA, as one of the US government's agencies, was granted this permission to instantiate these competitive prizes. And at that time, it was done in a way to go and encourage the development of these advanced technologies in the tradition of many of the challenges or the prize competitions that have existed previously. This was the first time that US agencies had this authority. And we were able to apply it in a very specific area that many of you are familiar with.
We had a military problem, which really required vehicles that could be driven without people in them.
We had a situation in the desert where a logistical convoy got ambushed. So we said, how can we stop that? How do I save lives? So that's the reason we went with the DARPA Grand Challenge.
And I remember reading about that challenge and being awe-inspired, thinking as a grad student, what could I do to compete?
And so even at that time, as a graduate student, was inspired by these types of challenges to want to go and compete, and honored to have had the opportunity to lead the challenge, which I'll describe more here shortly. But I think one of the key highlights, as was mentioned earlier, is this idea of what makes for a compelling challenge problem. It is true that many of our robotics problems are challenging, but not necessarily all our robotics problems are good for challenges. And so I think in this context of understanding, can we articulate the problem, that we know that there's a general nugget or insight that we want to capture, and that we're still able to understand the boundaries of the parameters for being able to turn that into some competitive mechanism. I think that's absolutely essential for these types of challenge problems. I think there's always often a question as to, could you do this through traditional means? Traditional means meaning more conventional approaches to research and development, perhaps. And the reason why that's important is because these challenges are resource intensive and have additional layers to provide a very meaningful and impactful experience. And so if there are alternate ways that you can focus your resources using these traditional means, perhaps that's a more fruitful way to proceed, and less so from a challenge perspective. But if it can't be, then a challenge might be the right solution. It's always important to articulate for any type of problem, if the problem is solved, who cares? This is one of the foundations of the DARPA Hellmeyer Catechism questions for defining good research projects to begin with. I think the element here, of course, is that these aspirational challenge problems really need that technical rigor in defining, is it indeed feasible from a physics point of view? We also like to wonder if it's fiscally possible in terms of being able to afford the technology that we're interested in. And then finally, most importantly, I would say, what are the metrics? Very similar to both the benchmarking side of the house, but also to define what winning means. And being able to do that in a crisp and clear, easily conveyable way was absolutely one of the key requirements of defining these types of challenges. So as you saw, there was a long history, starting with the DARPA Grand Challenge of the off-road self-driving vehicle competition in 2004, all the way spanning this long history now, tradition of DARPA challenges. I've listed a number of them. You've seen some of them scroll through, and I'll share a little bit more about the privilege I had of leading the DARPA Subterranean Challenge. I also want to highlight that this continues even after the DARPA Subterranean Challenge, of course, with two ongoing competitions. One is the AI Cyber Challenge, looking at how we can detect and discover potential vulnerabilities in, for example, open source software. And another challenge is the DARPA Triage Challenge. This is employment of autonomous systems to rapidly and critically go and triage or determine the criticality of injuries that might be present after a large-scale disaster event or incident. And so these, I think, continue this tradition of posing very compelling, but also very challenging DARPA challenge problems. And so to speak of the DARPA Subterranean Challenge and some of the lessons that we've learned by going and launching such a large-scale initiative, the purpose of this was to not only inspire, but also discover varieties of robotic technologies all around the world through this international forum, and be able to go and operate in diverse, in this case, underground environments. And the idea here is to deliver what we called actionable situational awareness, and we chose those words quite intentionally. Actionable meaning it's not just good enough to provide information or capture information if you can't relay it back to the people who need to make the decisions. And situational awareness was more than just mapping, more than just localization, more than just object detection, but really the end-to-end ability to truly understand what was going on in these underground settings. And so we were able to test in 3 different arenas, which was a key part of having that robustness and reliability in the face of uncertainty. And one of the key papers I'll draw your attention to is a paper focused on the design of the DARPA Subterranean Challenge specifically. So as was highlighted previously, benchmarking is one of the key enablers for these competitions, key enablers and outcomes of these competitions. I think one of the other elements is in the infrastructure, the context in which these experiments called challenges are conducted. And so I'd recommend taking a look at that design paper because it goes through even the level of detail that I'll describe here in a little bit about the course and the decisions made around how that was designed. And so there's a view of the challenge.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to DARPA's Subterranean Challenge, the final event.
To me, these are the Super Bowl of the engineering and scientist community.
It's been a lot of work, is really what it comes down to.
It's been a long and hard journey for the last 3 years.
Doing what we do and actually going out, seeing where the theory meets the, the pavement, it's world-class education.
There is a lot of knowledge in this cave.
And so what's exciting about the Super Bowl, or maybe the World Cup of robotics at the time, as it was referred to, was the bringing together of all of those different ideas and concepts and technologies to go and tackle this one singular objective of providing that actionable situational awareness. We defined it very distinctly and clearly to be able to say, go find distinct objects called artifacts, and to do so within a certain distance metric that provided an easy but clear, meaningful way to define what scoring means. And the idea here was to have, again, a diversity or multimodalness to the detection and classification problem, so as to really stress the systems integration challenges that come from all of these considerations to bring to bear. And so for those who may not be familiar, the general idea was DARPA would place in these unknown underground environments these different objects and essentially encourage our competitors to go and conduct these underground scavenger hunts to go and find these things. But it wasn't good enough to find them. There was a requirement to go and report this back out to the surface area where a human would be present. A human supervisor is triaging those reports and then passing them to DARPA to be scored. And that interaction between these robots and their human supervisor was a critical capability as well. And so I alluded to this earlier with this idea that the infrastructure is one of the key aspects of what makes the competition so powerful, is to provide a venue where you have commonality, whether it's a location or a test setup or the sets of evaluation metrics, as was mentioned previously. One of the ones I wanted to highlight to this conversation was how we constructed these underground environments. And in fact, for the final event, we constructed a subterranean environment in the caverns in Kentucky in the USA, where we took a limestone mine and were able to physically construct a test course that would meet the requirements to be able to evaluate our competitors. So I wanted to share a little bit more on that front specifically. So here's a walkthrough of this competition course. And of course, we start on the surface and we descend into the depths. And what I want to highlight is that this was all fabricated. DARPA brought in crews, artists, designers. We went to physical locations to get that inspiration to mirror the physical environments. You saw a subway station patterned off of a subway stop in New York City. This is a mine that's representative of those for gold or silver type mines that we went through. And this is all fabricated. These cave environments, we went to a number of different caves, took samples or sites, and were able to construct the different geometries and the different parameters and bring all of that to the competition. What I also wanted to highlight there, though, is that we were also bringing in things like RF propagation considerations. We wanted to make sure the communications propagations was realistic. We wanted to ensure that the material content was as close as we could to the types of interference mechanisms that might also be present. And so highlighting that these types of challenges give us an opportunity to dramatically up-level the type of competition settings to offer those really complex opportunities for testing systems integration. And in keeping with that, it doesn't benefit just the performers or the competitors at one time. These types of environments are great for being able to provide the sets of data or the artifacts that are required for generating reproducible robotics research. And so since the conclusion of the Subterranean Challenge, there have been numerous continuations of the projects, but also the use of these types of data sets, et cetera, that go far beyond those that competed in the competition alone. And so ultimately, I think this boils down to why does DARPA conduct these types of grand challenges? And so we have seen the use of these grand challenges to solve a problem that have been a tough nut to crack. And typically these traditional methods of exploring or soliciting proposals or what have you may not be the right way to bring in folks from all around the world, whether it's a single person working in his or her garage, all the way to world-class universities competing, to bringing in industry partners and startup companies to go and compete. The idea of having those unexpected solutions is exactly what we're after in these grand challenges. And usually that comes with it the opportunity to develop new research pathways that bring in quite a variety of folks to widen this performer base, who will not only continue in this research going forward, but also perhaps contribute to additional future DARPA programs as an example. And as was mentioned and will be a key element of these competitions on this panel today, is really encouraging that future generation of STEM researchers who can continue to develop and carry on this legacy. And so ultimately, I think for me, the most meaningful element of the DARPA Subterranean Challenge was being able to bring together a broad spectra of performers and backgrounds. The DARPA Subterranean Challenge was about that systems integration with a purpose for robotics technologies, and ultimately energizing a community that I think continues to thrive and is vibrant today. And so with that, I'm of course grateful for the opportunity to have served as a DARPA Challenge Program Manager, but I'm even more grateful to the community that had made it such a vibrant and meaningful experience. And I look forward to further conversation about the role of these types of challenges and competitions in the robotics community. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chung, for that very inspiring talk. I would now like to welcome, we'll leave questions to the end of this panel in the interest of time. I would now like to welcome our third speaker, Professor Ubo Visser from the University of Miami. He's a professor in the Department of Computer Science. He works in robotics and AI. And many of you would know Professor Visser as the president of the RoboCop Federation. He's also a trustee of the RoboCop Federation. I'm honored to invite you to the stage, Professor Visser. Thank you.
I'm going to take this mic. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm honored to be here today to speak to you about the accomplishments that the RoboCop Federation has created over the past 27 years. And I would like to convince you, like Pedro did and like Timothy did, that promoting and driving robotics and AI research can be done by robotic competitions. So as you see here, there are certain leagues we have. In total, over the years, we had about 17 leagues. On the top, you see some simulation leagues. They're actually going from 2D simulation, where we're looking for really good combinations of and strategies in a soccer game. On the left hand, on the middle side, you see a 3D full physics simulation, and on the right hand side, you see the physical robots actually playing. At the bottom, we're going to see also something else than robot soccer, because RoboCup is pretty much known for RoboCup soccer, for soccer playing robots, but we also see at-home environments and rescue scenarios. What I'm going to do today is give you some ideas of and objectives of what RoboCup is about, what we have done, give some objectives, show some leaks, mostly through videos. We will then talk about a little bit of the uniqueness of RoboCup. Why is this a different kind of beast as a DARPA challenge and other challenges, for example? I'm going to give you 2 examples of why a RoboCup competition, or why a competition like this is driving research. And then I give a little bit of an insight of the different leagues into some videos, and I sum up after that. So now, number one thing is that we have is it was invented in 1997 to promote robotics and AI research, not just playing soccer. It was the intent is to promote AI and robotic research. By how? By offering a publicly appealing and yet formidable challenge. So one of the effective ways of doing this is like those typical moonshot projects, something like what JFK said in the 60s, saying, well, at the end of this decade, we'll have a man on the moon. Well, we say something else. We're going to put a stake somewhere far away in the future and say, well, we will be able to do some challenge. I'm going to get to this in a moment. Now, if we do such thing, we can't talk about the grand challenge project. Building a robot that plays soccer does not necessarily give you any societal big impact. Yet I think we can all agree that by doing so, by being able to playing soccer, maybe against a human at some point, it has some impact. Now, we call this kind of project a landmark project, and that's something that is driving us for a while. So here's the dream. Some people call it a vision, other people call it a goal. By the year 2050, we have a team of fully autonomous humanoid robots playing against the human World Cup winner under FIFA rules. Now, this might be a little bit too much, some say. If you ask ChatGPT, then this is what comes out. Now, the robot that you see here, some of those humanoids, you might even actually have seen here during the exhibition. So hardware-wise, we might get there. If you look at the reality, and can I ask to play the video, please? Look at the reality. Once a year, the RoboCup trustees are playing against the world champion of RoboCup soccer. Nope. Can you play again, please? Doesn't want to play, interesting. We move on. Now, if we look at the leagues that we currently have, you see that some leagues started a little later than others, but you also see on the right-hand side that most of the leagues, they are still alive, they're still existing, which gives us like a big boost in confidence that people are still thriving and running. If you look at some of the key features of those leagues, I'm not going to make you read all through this, but some of this you might want to see, like the top line in the RoboCup soccer simulation. Small size league. You will see global vision, where both teams will benefit from one camera vision that is going over there. Moving on to the mid-size league, for example, we have an individual vision system with 360-degree views. Moving on to humanoids, we have an individual vision with limited views, usually about 180 degrees that you can have. On the motion side, on the very far right, the column, you see different kicking devices. that interesting. And this is something that I'm going to point out also. I'm going to show you a video in a moment that was driving research. How can you create a kicking device? How can you be inventive? In the mid-sized league, I remember some team came using a car suspension system, a spring of a car suspension system for a kicking device, a very powerful thing indeed. And in RoboCup at home, we introduced humans. All of a sudden, humans are in the loop. A robot has to be appropriately addressing the human. Not only manipulation is in there, there's also like this element of a human in the loop in there. And then RoboCup Rescue, there's something like, reminds me a little bit about the cave system at DARPA that we just have seen. We're going to have different scenarios and different parkours. Actually, most of you probably have seen on the other side in the competition, there was a RoboCup parkour here. Now, if you look at the development of the leagues, of the number of teams over the years, we're pretty stable, around 300 to 400 teams per year, around 2,500 to 3,000 people every year, with the exception of the pandemic, of course, and then the year after online, but you see that's going to pick up and we are back to normal. We're not having a competition only. We also have a symposium where we are publishing our findings, our scientific achievements here. This is like going on since 1997. Now, why is it unique? Number one is unique. Pedro mentioned that the Kiva Systems was there. Kiva Systems, one of the founders was part of RoboCup as well. But we're going to drive this, and this is the first point I'm making here is we have team representatives. Those ones select technical committee members. Those technical committee members are the ones who drive the research in in the short-term side, so to say. And then they have executive members. Those ones have the longer-term goals, while everybody is trying to achieve the ultimate goal. There is a distinct relationship between academia and industry for years, starting with Sony. Was just saying, Sony, okay, we'll have the eyeball dogs, and we're going to give it to RoboCup and tell us what you can do with it. And on the top right, you see what we can do with it. This is a video from 2002 that we have done. Now, I'm not going to go through all these selected research categories and topics, but you will see that almost anything that we have seen here this week in IROS is also part of RoboCup. But one difference is that it has to work on a system that is integrated. It has to work on a system that is robust, because if something works in your lab and then you write a paper about it, it's totally different if you take this outside of your lab, you bring it somewhere else, and then you need to show it that it works also outside. Here's one example of what was driving research, and this is a system from a Japanese team who invented a straight kick with a backspin to be able to have a curved shot. And this is what the outcome was. This was a while ago, 2017. Look at the ball. If you've seen it, we're going to do it again with quarter speed. The ball goes to the defenders. The defenders of the other team are seeing it. They're going after the ball, but because of that particular invention, the ball is taking a curve. Very remarkable. And this is something that was driven by necessity. You wanted to win. Here's another one. We had those now robots since 2008, and the ones can walk. Many teams have started, okay, this is a standard platform. The walk that comes with it isn't that great, so we're going to start walking. Then we introduced AstroTurf. AstroTurf, like 1.5 to 2 inches blades, all of a sudden messed up everything. So you see people fine-tuning the walk every single time, as you see people fine-tuning and cropping images every single time, 2 days before the event actually happens. That's about robustness. So we invented a new walk. That new walk is without parameter tuning. being able to walk on different surfaces. Even we put some shoes on to completely block the sensors that we have, and that worked as well. Can you press that video to play, please? Ah, there you go. So then, that was a slow walk. Here you see this, this was a competition of the fastest walk on this platform, which is a while ago, about 10 years ago. And you can see that how stable this walk is, and nowadays it's no problem anymore. Now, the humanoid leagues, this is one of them here in 2002. A very old video that I filmed when I was in Fukuoka. And that was state of the art at that time. Maybe not state of the art because the Honda Asimo was there. But in robot soccer, that's what it was. Nowadays, the kit size looked like this, where you have artificial turf. Those robots are self-made. Some of the teams are building their own robots, invent their own materials. But still, you can see they're struggling. They're struggling to get the ball over the line. There's a lot of falling because of the turf, and it's still difficult. Nevertheless, you know, it works. Now, the same thing here, you have a field with those humanoid robots, now robots. They are 7 versus 7 nowadays. It's very crowded, so you see the first behavior of some passing. Here was a passing. You will see another passing. So the intention is that the red robot is passing to the other one, but the goalkeeper catches it. And there you go, reactive behavior very quickly. Now, this is what you see these days in humanoid leagues. And on the left side, it's a team that has won competition many, many years from University of Bonn, from Sven Behnke. On the left-hand side, those ostrich-like robots that you see are from UCLA, Artemis. On the top right, you see a competition we did in a 3D simulation about 10 years ago, where it was a 100-meter dash, and what we wanted to do is to find the best, how you say, the best way a robot can achieve that. And so we morphed the robot, and out came an ostrich-like situation. RoboCup at home, I don't want to say much. We have heard that from Pedro already. In light of time, I'm going to skip that. I just want to show a one video of that in high speed. So here's a typical task, which is called storing groceries. What you have to do, what the robot has to do, is identify an object on the table. Of course, the lighting situation might be different from day to day, and then categorize that object and bring it and shelve it into different shelves so that it succeeds. What's missing here in this particular case is the human-robot interaction. That's something that I would like to see in the future. And then lastly, RoboCup Rescue, a pretty important part that we have these days. 20 test methods that are being created by the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the United States for different settings for mobility and also for dexterity. What I'm pretty proud of this year is on the bottom right, you see a member of a NATO bomb squad from Belgium who came to visit RoboCup this year to learn from the testing methods and also to explore ideas of how we can be able to assist with our robots in their endeavors. That's something you have seen. Locomotion these days is pretty much dominated by those 4-legged robots. But let me sum up for now. Now, what we have seen is RoboCup is the first and largest organization to introduce competitions as a benchmarking tool. And why? We do that because of appealing visionary challenges to drive research in AI and robotics. With at home and also rescue, we added societal challenges and disaster response, which is a real-world problem that we have, something very similar to what we have seen at DARPA. Now, what we foster also is interdisciplinary collaboration. We actually have the vision person who has to talk to the mechanic, who has to talk to people who do AI and who talk human-robot interaction. And largely, what's really truly remarkable here is the community itself. Why? Because everybody has the same problems. Something like the SPL, the Now Robots, for example, that league decided to not only share data sets on a year-to-year basis, but also to share code. So the top 3 teams every year will share the code so that new entry teams can be competitive the year after. And that's what drives science, that we're sharing data and we're sharing code, and that makes us a big community. Rapid prototyping innovation might be another one with very high-paced setup. It is, you want to win, you want to be good, and it also drives people and drives science forward. And largely, the public engagement and the funding we have, it's large scale, highly visible, which makes it, this international competition, a good showcase for solving real-world problems. With that, I would like to emphasize that I'm absolutely in favor of robotic competitions driving research in AI forward and science forward. And as a matter of fact, there has been one journal in the last year, the Japanese journal Advanced Robotics, who opened up a section for exactly that, robot competitions, benchmarking and testing and system integration. And I think that's the right way to do. Thank you.
Thank you. I would now like to invite our 4th speaker today, Professor Tom McCarthy. Tom leads the Challenges Unit here at Aspire. It's an organization based here in Abu Dhabi. And Tom has been instrumental in creating and leading some iconic robotic challenges here in Abu Dhabi. And I'm sure you'll hear about them in a few minutes. And prior to coming here, Tom was an economist. He's a professor of economics at various Irish and Canadian universities. So he brings a different perspective as well to this community. And I'm very interested to hear what you have to say, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lakmal. Could I ask the audio people, could you turn on the screens here in front? I can't actually see the presentation. Yeah, thank you very much. It's an honor for me to be here on this panel today with such a distinguished co-speakers. And I'm particularly happy to be representing the local team here in Abu Dhabi, UAE today. Before proceeding, however, I would really like to thank Lakmal and George for bringing IROS to Abu Dhabi, but also to acknowledge the contribution that they've made in raising awareness of the potential for robotics here in Abu Dhabi and the UAE, and as Lakmal said, his own contribution to running MBZ IRC. So thank you very much, Lakmal and George, for what you have done for us here in Abu Dhabi and the UAE. So, oops, this ain't working, guys. Can you move it on for me, please? Hello? Somebody is, looks like they're running up from the back there with a new clicker, I think. So as they are, I will, yep, have you got a new clicker for me? Have you got a clicker? Ah! So my organization, Aspire, is part of the Advanced Technology Research Council, which was established just over 4 years ago. And its mandate is to mature the R&D ecosystem here in Abu Dhabi and the UAE with the purpose of diversifying the economy of Abu Dhabi. ATRC operates both to drive policy development and also to be involved in the implementation role in the ecosystem, and it does this through 3 operating companies, Aspire, TII, and Venture One. And you probably have met many of my colleagues here from TII during the week. One of the core responsibilities of Aspire is to design and develop the grand challenges, grand societal challenges. So in doing this, we're very much motivated by the example of what is possibly the original grand challenge dating back to the early 18th century. And that grand challenge actually was formulated in an act of the British Parliament. So the problem that they were addressing was the fact that over 20% of all ships going to sea were foundering. And the problem was that nobody could figure out where they were on the Earth. They could measure latitude by taking readings from the sun and the angles of the sun, but they couldn't measure longitude because they didn't have a reliable clock that could enable them to know the time on board ship relative to the time at a reference port. So the captains and the merchants lobbied the British government, who established in 1714 the Longitude Act with the associated prize, worth at the time I think £20,000, will be worth £1.5 million today. For 14 years, nobody came up with any solution until a carpenter turned clockmaker, John Harrison, brought forward his clock. And over the rest of his life, he perfected that clock. That clock contributed in an age of steam to turning the potential of steam into something that could actually be valuable and useful, and the millions of lives that were saved and the millions in revenue that was generated as a consequence of this. So in late 2022, when we at Aspire sat down to think about a grand challenge to launch in 2023, one of the things we fixed upon is the fact that roads are not safe. In spite of all the innovations in automobiles, in spite of all the secondary safety, the crumple zones, the airbags, and so on, over 1.35 million people die every year in our roads, and 50 million more people are affected in one way or another through accidents and so forth. That is a terrible loss of life. It's a tragedy comparable to the motivation behind the original Longitude Act. And even more worrying, as we look towards primary safety, is that surveys tell us that consumers over the last number of years are pushing back against the autonomous systems being put into cars. Their trust in autonomous systems has actually diminished. Now, we think a lot of the problem is that there's been an over-focus on driverless cars. And instead, what we wanted to do was focus on the idea of autonomous co-pilots. A vision that in your car there would be a co-pilot that could learn your driving, learn road conditions, and be aware of what other obstacles are on the road, and be able to intervene and override you in order to save you. In order to get to that outcome, you would have had to do two things: demonstrate the capability of this technology in the most extreme conditions, and also build trust in users that would make it usable. So to that end, we decided we would establish the Abu Dhabi Autonomous Racing League, A2RL, and that we would get the fastest open-wheel race cars we could, set them up to race autonomously, bring the best talent from all over the world, and use the Yas Marina Formula One circuit in order to demonstrate the capability. So getting the car was the first thing. So we sourced the car from a car designed by Dallara for the Japan Super Formula Series. We had to change the setup of that car. In other words, take out all the seats and stuff that humans use. And we also changed the engine around a bit. We had to, of course, do what you do in motor racing, develop all the various components. But here we had two other things to do as well. We had to develop an autonomous stack, or autonomous skid as we called it. And it had to have a whole set of sensors that were able to act as the eyes of the car. We had to build perception into this car, and we also had to build the actuators that could drive on a drive-by-wire basis. So let me just play you a video on this.
Welcome to the Abu Dhabi Autonomous Racing League, A2RL, which brings together the exciting impact of artificial intelligence and its incredible potential for autonomy. Teams of scientists, coders, and developers from around the world will be incorporating cutting-edge technologies into racing vehicles, all with the aim of reshaping the future of mobility through extreme sports. The A2RL racing car is based on the Dallara chassis used in the Japanese Super Formula Series. It has a 4-cylinder turbocharged Honda engine, a 6-speed gearbox, and slick racing tyres. Oh, and it can reach speeds of up to 300 kilometers an hour. But the interesting part is here. A2RL cars won't have drivers, they will be completely autonomous.
So this car is a Super Formula car. As you know, Super Formulas are the second fastest car after Formula 1. Altogether, the car drives itself. Each lap generates like tens of gigabytes of data from all the sensor rails.
The A2RL car has many sensors. The GPS system is used to self-localize the car. It's a dual antenna GPS, one antenna on the nose, the second above the virtual reality camera pod near the roll hoop. This allows the car to know where it is on the track to a very high precision, within tens of centimeters. Radar sensors send electromagnetic waves into the air. These bounce back from obstacles, and by counting the time the waves take to go to obstacles and come back, the car estimates the distance to obstacles around it. LiDAR sends out an array of laser light and also counts the time for it to bounce back. That allows the car to make a dynamic 3D picture of obstacles, both moving and fixed, at a very high frequency. So the car generates pictures of its surroundings hundreds of times per second. Each car has 7 cameras, 6 at the front, 1 at the back. The car needs this many for a system called camera lock, which the teams can develop so the car can detect whenever it is passing or being passed, and tracks the car from camera to camera. Inside the car, there is a computer, which is the brain of the car. It takes in all of the sensor information, uses its high-end GPU to understand its situation, and decides what the car will do next. Each team will get an empty computer to write their code, and that is the ground where they will compete. So there you have it. That is how the 8 autonomous racing cars from teams all around the world will use cutting-edge technologies such as artificial intelligence, innovative sensor technologies, and powerful computing to create high-performance vehicles that are capable of making decisions, perceiving their surroundings, and most importantly, lapping the Yas Marina circuit here in Abu Dhabi without human intervention. For the teams, it's green for go.
Now, as Steph mentioned, it got the car, it got the track, but now it needs the teams, the best teams from all over the world. So we managed to attract 8 teams, and you see them on the left and the right side here. The team in front is the TII team. The TII team were our prototype development team. I'm going to talk a little bit more about something that they did later. But the teams on the sides, so we had 2 teams from Italy, we had a team from Germany, a team from Switzerland, a team from Hungary, a team here from Abu Dhabi, Khalifa University, in association with Beijing Institute of Technology, a team from Singapore, and a team from the US. Truly a global racing league. Now, they got their cars on the 5th of March. First time they saw the car, and they had to prove to us that they could make those cars move safely. And they were given 6 weeks to learn that and to train their cars and to arrive onto the Abu Dhabi circuit. After the first week, they were able to go on circuit and practice. And on the last Saturday in April, we brought them to a crowd to the Yas Marina circuit. You see here, we set up a fan zone, a STEM zone, and as well as the racing track. On the night, sorry, I'm just going to go back because I think I have lost one of those things. Oops, yep, okay, get me. So this is the track. What we intended doing was bringing to the track a large crowd so that they could actually see what was happening in track. But we also wanted to have a large online crowd. So we developed an app, and we broadcast and stream live. We also put into this car a VR camera so that with goggles on you could get a complete 3D experience and a virtual reality experience. And I'm telling you, putting those goggles on, you could actually feel the G-forces in the car. You had to sit down as the cars went around corners. You really, really felt that you were being subjected to the G-forces. Our longer term goal is that you will be able to play this game in apps and jump into the cars and actually have ghost cars racing against the other cars. Now, on the night, on the last Saturday in April, the teams, the 4 best teams, were invited to race against each other on track. Now, let me say that when we started out here, these teams could barely move the car on the 5th of March. Yet by the last Saturday in April, 4 of the cars qualified to race flat out against each other at the same time. It's never been done before. What has happened on circular tracks are 2 cars have raced around the track together. 4 cars have never been on the track together at the same time, and certainly not on a road circuit like this. So in doing this, we surmounted a technical challenge. Could we, racing cars flat out, get cars racing each other, passing each other out, and racing like race cars? If you look there, the blue car is 3rd. The blue car was the winner. So you can see it wasn't just following around in a procession. There were thrills and there were spills and there were crashes, exactly like you'd get in Formula 1. But it's only a start. Next month, we go to Suzuka in Japan to do a demo with the Japan Race Promotion Series, and that will be followed by the next race in April. And then we will have annually about 3 races per year. We're also going to introduce drone racing and buggy racing. But the main objective for us is what we learn from this, what we learn in terms of the technology and how that technology can be honed for application in road cars. So to that end, we had a conference the day after the race where we brought the industry professionals with us to actually investigate what we had learned and to get to the point where it's not a question of adding on autonomy like we did with this race car, but building in autonomy from the beginning. And that is our longer term objective with this. But I did say at the outset that it's no good just demonstrating the capability of technology. It's also important to bring the public along with you. So on the final night, we had 15,000 people in attendance. We had 600,000 people online during the time of the race, and within 2 hours, we had 1 million people online to view it. Now, our purpose in doing this is not just for the spectacle. Our purpose is to involve people in the science in the public domain. Because our feeling is that, as we saw with consumer acceptance of vaccines and the pushback against situations where science makes such rapid expanses in short periods, that we need to bring people along. So our point in doing this science and technology demo in the public space is to involve people. That's why we put so much effort into developing the VR cameras and the online experience, so that people can actually become advocates for this because of the experience that they say. In other words, if this can be done in racing, why can't I have it in my road car? And finally, as we go to look at the challenges and listening at the earlier speakers here, we are new to the game of doing grand challenges, and a number of things that we've learned is that a successful grand challenge requires us bringing together a clear identification of a problem statement for a societal grand challenge, a clear identification of the technology gaps that need to be filled, but also a realistic and appropriate ambition so that there is a stepwise progress to actually solving that problem. There is no point in coming along with aspirations that, as Tim said earlier, defy the laws of physics. We must look at the achievable and the doable, but we must focus on the ambitious. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor McCarthy. Thank you. I would like to invite the panel now, please, to come to the stage. I know we've had 4 really fantastic speeches, and I know time is short as well, and there are many, many questions that we can go through, but I would like to focus on one particular question. So we are all convinced of the value of competitions for research, for innovation, for tech transfer, education, benchmarking. But I also know as a faculty member and as somebody who's organized competitions, that the entry barrier to these competitions is very high. So what I would like to ask the distinguished panel is how do we engage you to be more participatory in future competitions? Perhaps I would like to start with Dr. Timothy, if you can hear us, please.
Sure. I think one of the main things here, like you said, is being able to have the type of students or participants that are driven to pull those long hours to go and deliver and be able to deliver under stress. I think that's one of the main things to keep in mind when you're pulling together these types of challenge teams. I think the other part here is for organizers to be able to identify what is that most compelling question. Just like our previous speaker said, what is that most compelling, inspirational problem that you can go and drive that kind of fervor from the participants. I think that's, those are the two ingredients that I think are going to be pretty key in those expansion of performers.
Thank you very much. I would like to work along here. Maybe, Tom, would you like to comment on that?
Well, I guess I was struck when Tim was talking earlier about saying it's just that it mustn't just not break the laws of physics, but not break fiscal laws either. And I'm clearly aware that the costs of what we did were very high. They were astronomically high. And I think it's a very fair question. We need participation. So first up, what we make essential is that there must be a STEM competition associated with what we do. So, and that's widely open. And ultimately what we want is teams to bring with them students from all over the world as part of this. The second thing that we're doing is, because look, we don't want to shy away from doing things that are expensive, and what we're doing is getting sponsors involved as well, so that we have teams that get sponsors so that they're able to become involved. And then the third thing is, I think you need to diversify and have competitions where there are lower entry barriers. So the drone, Abu Dhabi, the A2RL drone competition that will occur in the beginning of April has very, very low barriers to entry and the costs are much lower.
Thank you. And Pedro, also if you can focus on how best to attract university teams and also industry teams as well. I mean, is it the top prize money? Is it sponsorship? Or is it something else? Please.
I don't know. Can I use my microphone? Yeah, it's working. So, yeah, good that you raised it that way, because in my view, and I have defended that so many times, I think you know that well, I don't think, well, these big prizes for the winners are usually probably a good way of attracting people. But I think that particularly for academic people, it's even better if you, or much better I would say, if you save a lot of that money to provide funds to the teams to develop their work, say, during 1 year as a project. In fact, I've heard even colleagues who are not so enthusiastic about competition saying that they might consider doing that if they can bring their PhD students and postdocs and so on involved in something which is a project for which they can pay their grants and equipment and so on. And so I would say this is a way to go if we want to bring more academic people to the tournaments.
Please, your comments on this?
Well, it's a valid question, you know, how you get if you're already on a high level in certain leagues, how do you get new people into it? Number one is definitely if the league is open and sharing their data in their code, as I mentioned earlier. And the other thing is just, you know, a little bit going into Pedro's point is when Sony gave us their robots for free, they said, here we have those dogs, take them, show us what you can do. And boy, did we show them what we can do with them. They opened up their software. We had to all write, you know, sign NDAs from the provost and the president of the university to the student using it. But it's working. Same thing happened with Toyota, where we have the HSR that we are using. And if, you know, instead of having like something like X Prize, for example, where you have this big thing, if you take $1 million and give it to, let's say, the federation, and we pick the best teams, purchase the next generation hardware and then share the code. That's the way to bring a lot of progress. Because X prize or like those big prize monies, they make you close up. You don't want to share your code, right? And in the long term, I think it's better if you do.
Thank you very much for those very insightful comments. And also, we are very fortunate here to have this audience who have, I think, years of experience in designing competitions. And as we all know, it's not an easy thing to design a competition, to hit that sweet spot. If you look at the final outcomes, sometimes you might get a normal distribution for the marks, sometimes a binomial distribution, sometimes even a flat zero distribution. What are we aiming for here? And if you have a very short couple of sentence advice on how best to design competitions, how would you do that? Maybe I'll start with you now, Ugo, and then work the other way around.
How best to decide to get to the next challenges for competitions? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. How best to design the challenge?
Well, so what we found out in the last, let's say, 25 plus years is that you have to involve the teams, you have to involve the people. One thing is clear, the team members, some of them are PhD students, some of them are even undergrad students, okay. They're getting into this for the first couple of years. But then after a few years, you know what's going on in that league. They then become technical members, which drive the science. Okay, we can do something like this. For example, I remember in 2004 with the IRO dogs who switched off light. Light was at 1,000 lumens, and maybe we can do it. We switch off light the next year as a technical challenge and see if a third of the teams can stand this and can achieve it, then we make it a rule the next year, little by little. And then the EC, like the executive committee members, have a little longer term oversight. They really drive that science forward. And if you don't involve the teams and you just do top down only, it's not going to work. And we have seen that many, many times throughout RoboCup. Inventing new challenges at home was invented because somebody had a good idea. Now, I would like to see drones at some point. In some countries we can't fly because of licenses, but drones and rescue robots make a lot of sense to me, for example.
Thank you. Pedro.
So part of what I was going to say was said by Ugo already, because I think that there must be some balance between the pushing the boundaries of the research and what the technology and science cannot do, but at the same time keep it in a way that the teams can do something, because otherwise it's pretty frustrating for the teams and also for the success of the competition itself. And then I would probably bring something else, which is we must make it such that the people is interested, so it must be exciting for the people. That's another ingredient. And that they see that there are progresses and that things really work, and they see that they can be either applicable directly, or maybe, like in the case of soccer, they bring a lot of outputs which can be used for other purposes in the future. So I think at least these two things are very important.
Thank you, Tom.
I think the first thing is I'd certainly acknowledge the difficulty, and Tim, I think, succinctly captured this in his questions, that you really got to make sure that you specify the question. You can start out and be very ambitious about what you want to achieve, but it becomes a very frustrating outcome if people don't make at least some progress on the pathway to that. So the point that we try to do is try to identify milestones along the way to achieving. Let's have a very ambitious target, but let's also identify milestones that could be acknowledged as a significant contribution to getting there, so that when you set up competitions, you can get acknowledged for having made milestone 1 or 2 and maybe not getting to the full set. And the other point, I think, comes back to an interesting distinction Pedro made between competitions and challenges, in a sense that we can also, there is a certain benefit to be made to improving performance on doing something as opposed to making a technical breakthrough, because there is, in a sense, a technical capability inherent in improving that performance and the speed. And from an economic point of view, that's where productivity comes from. So I think we have to understand that there are different dimensions of achievement, and some of these dimensions of achievement are best captured through a competition with known technology to improve performance as opposed to pushing boundaries of technology.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Timothy, please.
Yeah, and as was mentioned, I think this gradation of capability and ability to score even 1 point. So I think the idea is that everyone can feel accomplishment in being able to achieve that 1 point, and having the flexibility in the design of the objective function and the infrastructure associated with it. I think that flexibility is part of the art of constructing these types of challenges, where then you can, of course, no changing of the rules or anything, but being able to calibrate as the performers, as the competitors are growing with you, being able to kind of dial up the difficulty or dial down the difficulty to appropriately tune your distribution, like you were saying. I do think that having that stratification is important so that you can see the differences in approaches and learn from each one of those. And I think the other angle here is that you see teams learning from each other, and I don't want to underestimate how critical that is. And what that does is just up levels the entire distribution. It puts the mean higher for the entire collective competition, the team members. And so make sure that the barrier to scoring a point is appropriate, but then also have dialable difficulty to be able to create that spread that you want to show that differentiation. I think those are the key knobs to bring to the table.
Thank you very much indeed. I know we are fast, we've gone past our allotted time, but I would like the audience, are there any pressing questions? And if you have, can you come up to the front, please? Hi, David, thank you.
Hi, thank you very much for the great talk. I participated in NBZRC 17 2024. I participated in DARPA Sub-T first and third. I participated in the Alpha Pilot, and I participated in the IAC, in the Autonomous Challenge. So I do have something to talk about the global competitions. So one thing I like to hear, or if I tell you, also I organized the world's first drone racing in IROS 2016 in Korea. That created great researchers like Guido or Dhabi Escaramuzza. So I was a competitor. I also was an organizer. So one thing I like to tell you, the organizers, is that you should sometimes put your feet in the competitor's shoes so that you can create a competitor-friendly competitions. I was number 2 at NBZRC 2024, and in order to, when you do that, competitors really find the meanings, and when they come there, and they learn really a lot. And many times the competitions are organized by the big companies and some people with agenda. But if you really care about researchers and competitors, you should really put yourself in the competitors so that they can do their best, learn something, maybe even earn something. And also I am participating in the drone racing in 2025. So I look forward to that. And if I can tell you guys, try to make the competitions a little bit in the competitor side, that they can really do something useful to the science, to themselves, and to the community, and to your own competition. Try to be competitor friendly. That's my request.
Thank you very much, David, for that comment. I'm sure you'll all agree with that. Would any one of you like to comment on that?
Can you summarize, because we could not understand, the sound is terrible.
So I think what David was saying was that...
Can you come closer to us, because it's the same problem. It's from
yes, so I think what David was saying was that we should make the competitions more competitor-friendly, which was related to my question as well. I 100% agree. And Timothy, maybe would you like to respond?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely, David. Good to see you, and thank you for the question as a long-time challenging competitor yourself. And I fully agree that there is a competitor lens that really transforms how impactful these types of competitions can be. I think, you know, having grown up in the era of RoboCup as myself and the DARPA Grand Challenge and kind of seeing that, I think that's living in that space, but then actually trying to develop and calibrate the technologies is absolutely essential to not only establish credibility for yourself as an organizer, but also to calibrate the level of difficulty. So I think being able to do that is key. The other part of that, I think, is being able to set kind of interim, I think Tom mentioned these milestones, and that gives you an opportunity to continue to learn, you know, in these trial settings that give you both concrete data, but also kind of competitor sentiment, and I think that's another feedback mechanism to bring into the conversation. Great question or comment.
Yeah, I would like to say something about the friendliness of those competitions. You see this. Sometimes, I mean, there is a team coming from Sydney, Australia, flying to Bordeaux last year. And in the second day, we see that the robot is broken down. So what do? Do you have an extra robot? No, but that's what our teams do. Say, if there is a possibility, the teams who are already out of the competition lend robots to the other teams, as long as there is a standard platform, of course, right? But you have to be friendly, otherwise it doesn't work. Sometimes the vision doesn't work, and or the navigation doesn't work for some reason, and there's always a friendly person from another team who is able to help out that moment so that you can actually excel, and that's what this is about, and we actually live that.
I was going just to underline what I said about this competition that we are organizing now, which is really under this concept of the teams collaborating. We are even encouraging them to do that. Though I should say, but Hugo said it again already, that my experience, for instance, with RoboCup is this. I mean, people help each other. Maybe because there's not a big prize at stake, money prize, I mean. But I'm not sure if it's even that. I think the community has this flavor of helping each other and being there for the same purpose. So.
If I may add, it's also something else, because you're building this community over years. We know each other for many years. We know how many years now? Over 20 years, right? We're competing. Yeah. So if we are in dire straits, I know I can go to Pedro and ask him, hey, look, you know, I have trouble. Can you help me out? And I'm sure that he will. And that happens. It's because they grow up together, so to say. And same thing with, in our teams, with a typical PhD student is around there like 5 years, and some of them hang around longer. We even have juniors, which we didn't talk about, and we're getting to the point that by the time they're 18, 19, they're able to get into university and get into the senior major teams and continue. We have done that. We have seen people who grew up 14 and they're now in their 30s and are rich and famous.
Thank you. Tom, how can we make this competitor friendly?
I guess one of the things that I'd like to see happen is that we de-risk for competitors you know, negative consequences, what could happen. So what I'm thinking of here, if you think of what we're doing, you know, given that there's certain liability on damage that occurs in the cars, you know, if you're a university, you can't come and say, wow, can't be sending me $1 million bill for this. So I think one of the things you try to do is you try to indemnify, which we do. And that's how you use sponsors, to indemnify. And I like that because we can say to people, you can really push the boundary out. You can really, really take risks, which is something that oftentimes, you know, if you get a research grant and, you know, one part of it is that you sort of destroy it in the first experiment. That ain't going to go down well. So we want to create an environment where people can actually be very out of the box in their thinking and their effort, but know that ultimately they'll be indemnified. So there are different aspects to making it competitor friendly. And I think that's one aspect. But I do think keeping the competitive aspect in there is an important part. And I love the co-opetition idea. It's great.
Okay, great.
So sadly, we have to bring this session to a close now. And I would like to thank our very distinguished speakers for attending this event and giving for fantastic talks and taking part in the panel discussion. Also like to thank the audience as well, coming for this Friday afternoon session. So I would like us all to thank our speakers and close this session. Thank you.
Thanks also to you for great moderation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Close to the hand. And thank you very much. I will ask just our team in the back to start preparing for the shows how we go up and make it in Abu Dhabi. So Abu Dhabi is Gazelle. So and this is the way we do it, right? So just I keep it a little more time. I hope many other people just joined here. Feel free just to see it. I think it's a very interesting memento, okay? gazelle. Was given to me by one of my sons. Then they said to me, nice, this is how we in Abu Dhabi do the things. We jump on the obstacles. And this is what I pass to you, Cecilia, and I think we just laugh. It's lovely, nice. Yes, it's not just that. It's just how we do it, okay? We do it, and that's why you are here, helping to do it. And yes, please, can you pass the next slide? Yes, in the morning we just ask, give me the number of people that really registered. This is the number that we have. A part of the visitors. We have probably, I'm maybe too much conservative, 2,000 something, maybe 3,000 that visit the exposition. It's quite a remarkable thing for some situation of people asking me, is it secure to be there? It's so difficult. Oh, the people suffer that. Should I use burqa or something there? Or should I, So nothing happened. And I'm thinking that you pick up the reality that happened here. Is an opportunity. Is an opportunity for all of us doing innovation here and help to make the change the world, okay? Next slide, please. Lakmal, we did this some years ago. This is how we started. Some of the people that already done, some are in the middle. Cecilia, you are not there yet, but you came later, okay? But it's what you have done some years ago. And this, next slides, please. Next slide. And this is more or less what happened along the time. Different people that enjoying and different ways of interacting. This is just typical photos that we have from the region here. The delegates that come, normally they dress this way, but is what is you need to respect. But of course the interaction, and it was much more important to see different ways of operating, okay? Thank you very much for coming. And Cecilia, I don't know, I think it's time to say something, okay?
Yeah, I mean, like gazelles, we jumped over the obstacles and brought to you an amazing program. Of course, I'm biased saying that because I'm program chair, but I think the program was really exciting, rich, intense, inclusive, many different opportunities to listen to science, to interact, to discuss. But again, let me iterate the message that I already gave during the previous days. This is there, the program was there, and this successful conference has been there just because of you, just thanks to you, to your contribution, to your high-quality research work, and to your attendance of this conference here. So thanks again for making all this possible. Thank you.
I don't know if it's possible to pass to the last slide. So, yeah, after the photos, can you just go to the last one, please? Different parts, of course, and they will be later on. Very important. This conference is not made by just us, it's just all of you, right? So it's quite important. Yes. Yes. Now it's time to relax, okay? So it's the end. Is when the gazelle just go down and enjoy. So enjoy your weekend, okay? Thank you very much for coming. Thank you for all the time you have here. Thank you. Do like the gazelle, do it here, okay? So, I think it's time to say that it's time to also see what next happen in the 2025. My colleague, yes, please come. Okay. Before you start, I'd like to offer you something. Okay?
Okay.
So it's a book saying centuries of exchange between Chinese and Islamic worlds. Okay? For you, as we are connected somehow in this region. Okay?
Nice.
Yes.
Nice.
Please.
They can.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Good luck, huh? Good luck for you. Okay, take your time.
Okay. Can you show my slides? First, I want to congratulations to George and Cecilia for this wonderful and successful IROS 2024. Then we come to our next IROS 2025. We'll hold this in Hangzhou. The date is 19th to 25th October. That's the best season in Hangzhou, China. The conference website is also listed here. The submission deadline will fix on the 1st March. We will not extend as required by the conference editorial board. So please prepare your paper and submit before 1st March. It seems I don't know how to. Maybe someone can help me to go to the next slide. Okay, so first, where to Hangzhou? So as you can see, the location of China in the Far East. The Hangzhou, we have the Beijing and Shanghai. That's the two major cities in China. Actually, Hangzhou is very close to Shanghai, located in the Yangtze River Delta area, only 100 kilometers from Shanghai. And Hangzhou is also a very large city with a population of 12 million, one of the 10 largest cities in China. Go to the next slide. Shanghai is the finest and the most beautiful city in the world, as marked by Marco Polo. And also Hangzhou has the history of more than 2,000 years. And also it's very beautiful with the West Lake located in the city center. And it's also where's one old saying in China that's up above. There's a paradise. Down here, then we have Suzhou and Hangzhou. That's the two beautiful cities close to each other. Go to the next slide. I just list a few beautiful places. We have one World Heritage more than 5,000 years. And also we have the most beautiful mountain in China, Yellow Mountain, just nearby. We also have many other places for sightseeing. Go to the next slide. We have, of course, the many delicious Chinese food. I just list a few. We will provide most of them during the banquet. Next slide. Here is the conference center, one of the largest conference centers in China, where the G20 2016 was held there. They have the capability to hold the conference with more than 20,000 attendees. So we basically already booked the whole convention center and part of the exhibition center. So we will have a very large exhibition next year. Next slide. So the location of the convention center is also very convenient. If you take a taxi from the airport, it's only 20 minutes. Of course, we can take other public transportation like bus or the metro. Next slide. So here's the inside. We have the many meeting rooms. It's available for different arrangement. We will also have the style with 7 mini spotlight and combined with the poster. Next slide. So nearby, we have many hotels, ranged from the budget hotel to the 5-star hotels, very close to the convention center. Next slide. Also, Hangzhou, since I mentioned, Hangzhou is one of the largest cities in China. We also have many direct flights to Europe, also to the Dubai in UAE. We also have the direct flight, and also to Australia and so on. And also, you can transfer from Beijing. But Shanghai is too close, so we do not have flight from Shanghai to Hangzhou. Next slide. That's the Shanghai Pudong International Airport. That's the largest international airport in China. So we have many direct flights to USA, European, Canada, and so on. And also, Hangzhou is very close to Shanghai. You can take the bullet train. It's only less than 1 hour. You can arrive Hangzhou. And also, we will also certainly arrange the shuttle bus from the Pudong International Airport to the Hangzhou Convention Center. Next slide. And also, the good news is that we have the visa-free 15 visa-free policy just released by the government that most of the European countries, and also including the, of course, the UAE, and also Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia, and also Australia, New Zealand, and so on, they are visa-free. And for many other countries, we also have the policy of the 144 hours, that's exactly 6 days, visa-free. Including UK, United States, Canada, Japan, South Korea. You can visit the area around the Shanghai, Hangzhou. Also, Hangzhou is one city belonging to Zhejiang province. So basically, you can have 6 days visa-free for most countries. So visa is not a problem, but of course, you can apply a tourist or business visa if you want to stand longer than 6 days. So that's good news for most of us. The next slide. I just have 2 videos, not very long. One, can you play the video?
Hangzhou, Hang for short, is the provincial capital of Zhejiang, an important central city in the Yangtze River Delta, and a transportation hub in southeastern China. Hangzhou has a history of more than 2,200 years. Owing to its abundant products, it is known as the land of fish and rice, the home of silk, and the paradise on earth. Hangzhou has the longest artificial canal in the world, the Beijing-Hangzhou Grand Canal. And it was once an important commercial distribution center in history with its superior location. Since the new century, with the rise of high-tech companies such as Alibaba, the internet economy has developed quickly in Hangzhou. Hangzhou silk has a long history and is famous both at home and abroad. As early as more than 1,000 years ago, Hangzhou silk was exported to Southeast Asia and the Arab countries. And several dynasties built the Silk Road from land and sea for it. Hangzhou is rich in Shihu Longjing tea, which ranks among the top 10 famous teas in China. So here is known as the Chinese tea capital. Hangzhou is one of the first batch of China's best tourist cities, a famous historical and cultural city in China and one of the 8 ancient capitals. It has national tourist attractions such as the Shihu Lake, the Qiandao Lake, and the Shishi Wetland.
Next slide. Yeah, I have one more video. Can you play it? Yeah, this is another video. This is the West Lake. one of the most famous lake in China. It's just located in the city center. And this is the Qiantang River. That's Hangzhou in Chinese character. The traditional performance. And Hangzhou is also the headquarters of Alibaba. So we will arrange a technical tour to Alibaba and Unitree. I think they have the exhibition here. That's the convention center, and when the G20s was held there. And the convention center is very close to the river. Okay, next slide. We have the IROS first come to mainland China in 2006, so they have been 20 years, and within these 20 years, China have been developed a lot, and Hangzhou is in the one of the richest area in China. So welcome you all to China, to Hangzhou, to have a different experience about the culture, about the technology of mainland China. So welcome you, and thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, let's go. Okay, thank you very much. Safe travels, okay? We finished, okay?